Ruth Mercer had come to the cooperative for one answer, and by the time her son arrived, two men behind the counter were looking at her as if she had misplaced her own name. The payment was issued on the 12th, Hollis Wade said. He kept his voice gentle, which made it worse. All £78,000, same rate Walter locked in. I'm not asking whether you issued it. Ruth gripped the edge of the counter. I'm asking where you sent it. Hollis glanced at his computer again. Before he could answer, the glass door swung open and Dean came in, wearing dusty work boots and the red jacket from his excavation company. There you are. He sounded relieved. I've been calling. My phone's in my purse, which is why you didn't hear it. I know where my phone is, Dean. One of the younger clerks became intensely interested in a stapler. Dean stepped beside her and smiled at Hollis. Sorry about this. Mom's been confused since Dad passed. Just call me when it happens. For half a second, nobody moved. Ruth felt Dean's hand close around her elbow. Not hard, kindly almost. The way a man might guide an unsteady stranger away from traffic. She looked down at his hand, then up at her son. What frightened her was not that he had lied. It was how ready everyone seemed to believe him. 6 weeks earlier, Dean had stood in nearly the same spot at Walter Mercer's funeral luncheon, balancing 2 paper plates and telling Ruth she needed to eat. The church women had filled the fellowship hall with enough food to provision a road crew. Ham biscuits, green beans cooked past surrender, deviled eggs dusted with paprika, and 3 kinds of sheet cake crowded the folding tables. Walter would have complained that everybody was eating indoors on a day too pretty to waste. Then he would have eaten 2 pieces of cake. Ruth had not eaten any. Dean put a plate beside her. Just try the potatoes. They've got cream cheese in them. That's why they're good. That's why they're wallpaper paste. His mouth twitched. For a moment he was 15 again, trying not to laugh at the wrong time. 3 bites, he said. You always were bossy, learn from the best. He pulled out the chair beside her, but someone called his name from across the hall. Dean had been in motion all day, carrying flower stands, finding extra chairs, thanking people Ruth could not identify. He had chosen the photograph for the funeral program, the one of Walter leaning against the south pasture gate, with his hat pushed back and a look on his face that suggested the photographer was holding up real work. Dean had handled the casket spray when the florist delivered white lilies instead of the yellow roses Ruth ordered. He had found the correct cemetery deed after Ruth stared at Walter's desk drawers and could not remember which one held anything. When the hearse driver asked about the route, Dean answered before Ruth understood the question. She had been grateful for every interruption. Claire arrived late to the luncheon, though not to the service. She had changed out of her black dress and into slacks and a gray sweater, as if the dress belonged only to the church, and whatever came afterward required armor. You should sit down, Claire told Dean. I've been sitting, not since Tuesday. I sleep lying down. That counts. Claire looked at Ruth. Has he fed you? He's trying to kill me with cream cheese. That means yes. Ruth's daughter sat across from her and folded her hands on the table. Claire had Walter's straight eyebrows and Ruth's habit of watching a person long enough to make them confess something. How are you doing? Claire asked. It was the question everyone had been asking, and Ruth still had no useful answer. My good stockings are trying to cut off my circulation. Claire nodded. Besides that, I don't know yet. Dean came back with coffee for Ruth and set it on the wrong side of her plate. Walter had always put it by her right hand. Ruth moved it without thinking. We need to go through Dad's desk this week, Dean said. There are bills that can't wait. Claire's eyes shifted to him. This week? Farm doesn't stop because we had a funeral. No, Ruth said. It doesn't. Dean leaned his forearms on the table. There was dried mud at one cuff, though he had worn his suit to the cemetery. He must have changed shoes and checked livestock before the luncheon. That was Dean. Even as a young man, he had never been able to pass a crooked gate without lifting it back onto its hinge. I can take the mail for a while, he said, just until things settle. Claire's gaze came back to Ruth. Do you want that? Ruth heard the question beneath the question and disliked it on principle. I want not to spend my husband's funeral talking about invoices. Dean sat back. That's fair, Claire said. I wasn't trying to. I know what you were trying to do. Silence settled between them, familiar and well-furnished. Dean broke it by stealing one of Ruth's untouched deviled eggs. These have pickle relish in them. Your father hated relish. He ate 6 at the 4th of July supper. He complained through all 6. That pulled a laugh out of Claire before she could stop it. Ruth laughed too, one surprised breath that turned painful halfway through. Dean looked down at the egg in his hand. For a little while, they sat together without deciding what anything meant. The farm did not stop. At 4 the next morning, Ruth woke because Walter had not coughed. For 11 months, his coughing had divided the night into pieces. She would lie still and count the seconds between each rough pull of breath, pretending she was not counting. Now the bedroom was silent except for the faint tick inside the baseboard heater. Ruth reached across the mattress before she remembered. His side was cool and flat. She had changed the sheets the day before the funeral because she could not bear the smell of medicine anymore. Now they smelled like the lavender detergent Claire bought her, too bright and clean for the room. Ruth dressed without turning on the overhead light. Thermal shirt, flannel, jeans, wool socks. Walter's denim jacket still hung on the hook behind the door. She put her hand against one sleeve as she passed. Outside, the March air had teeth. The security light washed the gravel yard in pale blue. Beyond it stood the machine shed, the lambing barn, and the dark line of the orchard. 200 acres, more or less, depending on whether a person counted the creek banks and the stony ground Walter called pasture, because calling it useless offended him. A ewe bleated from the barn. "I'm coming," Ruth said. The barn smelled of straw, lanolin, and the warm animal damp that clung to her hair no matter how long she stood under the shower. One of the yearlings was pawing at the bedding, sides tight with early labor. Ruth crouched near the pen, felt the ewe's belly, and checked the water bucket. "You've got all day to make trouble," she murmured. "Don't rush on my account." At 68, kneeling was easy. Standing back up required negotiation. Ruth braced one hand against the rail and waited for her left knee to agree. Headlights swept across the barn wall. Dean entered carrying 2 foam cups and a paper sack. "You scared me. I'm in my own barn. Your kitchen light was off. It was 4:30. Exactly." He handed her a coffee. Black, no sugar. He remembered which side she took it with. "What's in the sack?" she asked. "Biscuits. If it has sausage gravy, you can feed it to the ewe. It has bacon." She's listening. Dean smiled, but his face looked worn. Without his funeral suit, he seemed older than 45. Gray showed along his temples, and there was a permanent pale stripe around one finger where he had stopped wearing his wedding ring the previous year. Ruth had never asked whether he and Amy were separated for good. Dean had never volunteered an answer. He leaned over the pen. "How long?" "Not long. Presentation feels right. I'll stay. You've got a crew start in that drainage job. They can load pipe without me." Ruth sipped the coffee. "Can they?" "Probably not." He stayed anyway. The ewe delivered twins just after sunrise, both vigorous and loudly offended by the world. Dean wiped the second lamb's nose while Ruth stripped the teat and guided the first one toward milk. They worked with the old economy of people who had done the same task beside each other for decades. When it was over, Dean sat on an overturned bucket and ate both biscuits. "You said one was mine," Ruth told him. "You threatened to give it to livestock." That was the gravy. Contract was unclear. Walter would have enjoyed that exchange. The thought arrived whole, followed by the instinct to repeat it to him later. Ruth turned away and gathered the dirty towels. Dean watched her for a moment. "I can come by tonight and sort the desk." "Not tonight. There are probably checks that need depositing. Then they'll keep one more day." "Mom?" The word was soft, but it carried the pressure of a hand at her back. Ruth faced him. "Your father has been buried less than 24 hours. Dean's expression changed. "I know that. Do you?" He looked as if she had slapped him. The reaction was so immediate that she regretted the question, though not enough to apologize. Dean stood and crushed the empty coffee cup in one hand. I was there too. Then he carried the wet towels to the utility sink, rinsed them out, and hung them over the rail before leaving for work. That was the trouble with Dean. Even hurt, he finished the chore. Over the next several days, help arrived in practical disguises. Neighbors left casseroles in Ruth's freezer. Ben Talley, who had not spoken to Walter in 3 years, parked by the machine shed long enough to ask whether the North tractor still leaked hydraulic fluid. "Only when it's running," Ruth said. Ben rubbed his beard. "Walter ever fix that return line?" He put a bucket under it. "That sounds like Walter fixing it." Ben offered to take a look. Ruth said she would call him, knowing she probably would not. Walter had accused Ben of overcharging for a transmission repair. Ben had accused Walter of believing every handshake included a lifetime warranty. Both men had gone home, pleased with their anger. Claire called each evening from her apartment in Columbia. You sleeping? She asked on Thursday. Some. Eating? Dean brought chili. That wasn't what I asked. I ate the chili. Claire paused. Is Dean there now? He went home. Has he been through Dad's papers? Not yet. Another pause, longer this time. You should be there when he does. Ruth carried the phone to the kitchen window. Across the yard, Dean had left the office light burning in the machine shed. He had spent 2 hours checking maintenance logs and had written a list on the whiteboard in his blunt block letters. Filters, front tire, auger bearing, call Hollis. He's trying to help, Ruth said. I didn't say he wasn't. You have a tone. I always have a tone with Dean. It saves time. Claire. All right, her daughter exhaled. Just don't let everybody decide what you need before you've had a chance to decide. Ruth watched a moth strike the office window again and again, drawn to a light it could not reach. I'm tired, she said. I know. No, I'm tired of being asked questions. Claire was quiet. Then I'll call Sunday. After they hung up, Ruth stood in the kitchen with the refrigerator humming behind her. Walter's reading glasses lay beside the salt shaker. A folded feed receipt protruded from beneath them, his handwriting covering the back, figures, arrows, a phone number without a name. Ruth left it where it was. By the second week, Dean had redirected the farm mail to his excavation office. He mentioned it while replacing the bulb over Ruth's back porch. That way, nothing gets missed, he said from the ladder. I get mail here. You get mail. You don't always open it. I opened it before your father died. Dean twisted the glass cover into place. Dad opened the farm stuff, and I opened everything else. This is temporary. Ruth looked up at the soles of his boots. Did you ask me? He stopped moving. The new bulb threw hard white light across the porch, showing every crack in the paint. I thought we talked about it, he said. We did not. Dean climbed down slowly. Fine, I'll bring it over. All of it. I said I would. The next morning, a grocery sack full of envelopes appeared on her kitchen table. Dean had arranged them by size and clipped the supplier invoices together. He had also brought milk, oranges, and the oatmeal Ruth liked. She found herself angry at the oranges. Still, the farm accounts were a thicket of names and numbers Walter had never expected anyone else to enter. Ruth knew what things cost in the intimate way of someone who noticed each increase at the feed counter. She did not know which checking account paid for what, whether the combine loan drew automatically, or why Walter kept 2 separate files labeled tax, current. When she asked Dean for the online banking password, he said he would print the statements. When she asked again, he said the bank's website was a mess. The third time, he kissed her forehead and said, Let me carry one thing for you. Ruth let him. That was what she remembered at the cooperative 6 weeks later, when his hand tightened around her elbow and Hollis looked at her with careful sympathy. Ruth pulled free. I asked where the grain payment went, she said. Dean's jaw shifted. I handled it. That isn't an answer. We'll talk at home. No. We'll talk here. Hollis cleared his throat. Ruth, maybe Dean can show you the account record. Which account? Dean's face went still. It was a small thing, that stillness. Anyone who had not watched him learn to lie about broken windows, overdue homework, and the smell of beer on his jacket might have missed it. Ruth picked up her purse. I know where my phone is, she told him. I know where I parked, and I know 78,000 pounds of grain does not vanish because my husband died. She walked out before her knees could betray how badly they were shaking. At home, she went straight to Walter's desk. She opened every drawer, removed every folder, and stacked his old seed catalogs on the floor. In the back of the shallow center drawer, beneath a warranty for a chainsaw they no longer owned, she found a yellow sticky note folded once down the middle. Walter had written 3 passwords on it. Ruth sat in his chair and opened the farm laptop. The first password failed, so did the second. The third opened an account she had never seen. At the top of the screen, beneath the grain payment from the cooperative, was the name of the person authorized to withdraw it. Dean Mercer. Ruth stared at Dean's name until the letters lost their shape. The account title was Mercer Operations, not Mercer Farm, not Dean's excavation company. Just vague enough to hold anything a person wanted to put inside it. The balance was $18,426.71. Ruth moved the cursor over the most recent grain deposit and clicked. The cooperative's payment had gone in 9 days earlier. The next morning, $12,000 had gone out to Mid-State Equipment Finance. 2 days after that, $31,000 had been transferred to Mercer Excavation. Smaller payments followed: fuel, truck insurance, a concrete supplier in Jefferson City, and a check for $4,800 made out to Amy Mercer. She clicked the check image. Dean's signature crossed the bottom. In the heavy slant, Ruth knew from birthday cards and permission slips, and the time he had signed for a registered bull without telling Walter first. The memory was 27 years old, but Walter's shout came back clean. A man who signs his name needs to know what he's promising. Walter had made Dean return the bull. Ruth opened the previous month's statement, then the one before that. Her mouth had gone dry, and she had to remind herself to breathe through her nose. Farm deposits appeared throughout the account. A livestock sale in December, 2 grain payments the previous fall, a federal crop insurance payment after drought damage. Money also came in from Dean's excavation work and went out toward the machinery note: tires, payroll, fuel, and parts. Nothing was neat enough to call theft from a computer screen. The farm used Dean's skid steer. Dean used the farm's flatbed. Walter had bought diesel in bulk, and Dean's crew sometimes filled up at the farm tank. They had traded labor and equipment for years, with no more accounting than a nod over coffee. But the grain payment was not a trade. It was Walter's last crop, grown on Ruth's land, and Dean had moved most of it before she knew it existed. Ruth found the print icon and clicked it. The old printer under the window woke with a shudder, dragged in one sheet, and began making a noise like a trapped insect. The office door opened behind her. Dean stopped on the threshold. For a moment, he looked only surprised. Then he saw the account on the screen. "Where did you get that password?" "Your father left it." "Mom, listen to me. That would be easier if you answered questions." He closed the door. "You walked out of the co-op like I was trying to steal from you." Ruth turned in Walter's chair. "What would you call taking my grain check?" "I didn't take it." "Then why is it in your account?" "It's an operations account. Dad and I used it for shared expenses. Your name is the only one on it because I opened it, and you paid your company $31,000 for equipment costs the farm owes. You paid Amy $4,800. His eyes flickered toward the computer. "That's not what you think." "I don't know what I think. That is the problem." The printer spit out the page. Dean stepped toward it, and Ruth put her palm on the warm paper before he could reach it. His face changed. It was not anger yet. It was the look of a man arriving at a door he had expected to remain locked. "Dad knew about that account," he said. "He knew about all of it?" "Yes." "Did he know you moved this grain payment?" Dean rubbed one hand over his mouth. He knew what the plan was. "That isn't what I asked. You want a simple answer, and there isn't one. Try me." He walked to the window, then back. The office was too small for pacing. Walter had filled it with file cabinets, seed company calendars, and a framed aerial photograph of the farm taken when the orchard still had 12 straight rows. "The excavating business had a rough winter," Dean said. "The county delayed payment on 2 jobs. I had equipment notes due, and I couldn't leave my crew hanging, so you used farm money. Dad and I shared equipment. Your father is dead." Dean flinched. Ruth hated the satisfaction that gave her. "The farm owed me," he said. "How much?" "I don't have the number in my head." "You had enough of a number to transfer $31,000. The skid steer alone put 300 hours on this place last year. My dump trailer hauled rock for the creek crossing. My men rebuilt the west fence. And the farm diesel in your trucks? I paid for some of that." "How much?" His voice rose. This is exactly why Dad handled it. The words struck so cleanly that neither of them could pretend they had landed somewhere else. Dean looked away first. Ruth folded the printed statement once, then unfolded it. "Why did you tell Hollis I was confused? I was trying to get you out of there before you embarrassed yourself. I asked about my own money. You didn't know what account it was supposed to go into. Neither did Hollis, apparently. You've had a bad 6 weeks. So have you." "I know that." "Do you?" There it was again, the same cruel question she had asked in the lambing barn. This time Dean did not look hurt. He looked furious. "I found Dad on the machine shed floor," he said. "Did you forget that part?" Ruth's hand tightened around the statement. Walter had collapsed while checking the hydraulic line on the north tractor. Dean had arrived to borrow the flatbed and found him lying beside the workbench, conscious but unable to speak. Walter died at the hospital 4 days later. "I haven't forgotten anything," Ruth said. "I did chest compressions until the ambulance came. I called Claire. I called the pastor. I drove you home from the hospital because you couldn't find your purse when it was hanging off your shoulder. So, forgive me if I thought you might need help." The purse had been hanging from her shoulder. Ruth remembered that now. She also remembered Dean taking it from her and carrying it into the house. Needing help was not the same as needing to disappear, but grief had blurred the boundary even for her. "Did you use that story at the cooperative because it was true?" she asked, "or because it was useful?" Dean's expression shut. He reached for the doorknob. "I'm not doing this while you're worked up." Ruth gave a short laugh. "Your father used to say that when he was losing an argument. Dad isn't here for you to drag into this." "No, he isn't here to explain what the two of you decided." Dean opened the door. "Bring me the records," she said. "What records?" "Every farm expense that account paid. Every hour you claim the farm owes you. Every gallon of fuel. Every equipment charge. Every check. You think I have receipts going back years? I think you had better start looking." He stood with one boot outside the office. "And if I don't?" Ruth looked at the screen, then at him. "I suppose I'll have to decide what kind of man needs his mother to be confused." Dean left without closing the door. His truck tore down the gravel lane fast enough to throw stones against the mailbox post. Ruth remained at the desk until the printer clicked and went quiet. Her hands began shaking only after she heard his truck turn onto the county road. She printed 6 months of statements. The printer jammed twice, and each time she had to open the back panel and pull out a wrinkled sheet blackened with toner. Walter had always smacked the machine on top. Ruth resisted doing that out of spite. The phone rang while she was sorting the pages. Claire's name appeared on the screen. Ruth nearly let it go to voicemail. Then she answered. "What happened?" Claire asked. "Why do you assume something happened? Dean called me. That was fast. He said you found an old business account and accused him of stealing. I asked why my grain check paid his company." Claire went silent. Ruth heard traffic in the background, then a car door shut. Claire had probably left work and was sitting in the hospital parking garage, gathering herself before the drive home. "How much?" she asked. "31,000 to his company. Other payments too. From this one check?" "Yes." "And the account belongs to whom?" "Dean. He says he and your father used it together." "That sounds possible." "It does." Claire exhaled. "You sound disappointed. I would like him to be entirely wrong." "Dean? Your brother. It would be easier." Claire took a moment before answering. "Easier for who?" Ruth aligned the edges of the statements against the desktop. "Don't start. I'm not starting anything. You've been waiting years to tell me he takes advantage. I have said it to your face many times. Waiting has not been required." Ruth closed her eyes. Claire's anger toward Dean had roots that spread farther than the present account. Dean had stayed near the farm. Claire had left for college, then made a life 2 hours away. Every time Walter needed surgery, every time fencing went down, every Christmas storm that made the roads impassable, Dean's presence became evidence against Claire. Ruth had helped make it so. "Your father may have approved some of these payments," she said. "He probably did. You say that as though it settles things." "No, I say it because Dad could be generous with anything he didn't have to explain to you." Ruth looked toward the kitchen, where Walter's glasses still lay beside the salt shaker. "He explained things. After he decided them. That isn't fair?" "No," Claire said. "It isn't." The words were quiet, not sharp. They hurt more that way. Ruth picked up the oldest statement. A payment to Mid-State Equipment Finance appeared on the first page, followed by charges at 2 gas stations and a parts store. "Can you come Saturday?" Claire did not answer immediately. "I can," she said at last. "I want you to look at the statements. Because I'm a bookkeeper, because you see traps everywhere. That is the nicest thing you've said about my personality in years." Despite herself, Ruth smiled. "Saturday morning, I'll bring breakfast. No cream cheese. Now I know you're all right." After the call, Ruth carried Walter's reading glasses into the office and set them on top of the first statement. She opened the metal file cabinet. Walter's folders were labeled in black marker, though several contained things unrelated to the words on their tabs. A folder marked Seed held machinery receipts. Insurance contained veterinary bills, 2 maps, and a recipe for blackberry wine. Near the back, she found an envelope labeled Dean Equipment. Inside were 3 invoices, a handwritten list of hours, and a note in Walter's cramped script. D owes farm for diesel. Farm owes D for skid steer. Settle after harvest. No amounts, no date. Beneath it was a second note on the back of a feed receipt. Help him through winter. Grain will cover note. Don't tell R until numbers are firm. Ruth read the sentence twice. Walter had known. Worse, he had planned to tell her eventually, after the decision could no longer be changed. She took the note to the kitchen and placed it beside the salt shaker. For several minutes, she stood looking at the chair where Walter had eaten breakfast every morning, tapping receipts into neat little stacks while telling her not to worry about paperwork. Then Ruth opened the junk drawer. She found a ruled receipt book still wrapped in plastic, a box of pens, and the small locking file box they once used for livestock health papers. She carried all three to the table. On the first page of the receipt book, she wrote the date. Below it, she copied the balance from every account she could access. When she finished, she drew a line beneath the figures. If I spend it, I can explain it. The sentence looked stern and lonely in her handwriting. Ruth closed the book, turned the key in the file box, and slipped it into her pocket. Claire arrived Saturday with egg sandwiches, a portable scanner, and the expression of a woman prepared to dislike what she found. She set the food on the kitchen table and looked at Walter's note beside the salt shaker. Is that his handwriting? Ruth nodded. Claire read it without touching it. Her mouth tightened at the final sentence. Say it, Ruth told her. I haven't said anything. You've been saying things silently since you came through the door. Claire took off her coat. Dad didn't want to tell you until the numbers were firm. There were no numbers. I noticed. He may have meant to work it out. He may have. Ruth frowned. You don't have to agree with everything I say. I'm trying something new. It's irritating. I was afraid of that. They ate before opening the file box. Claire had brought the sandwiches from a gas station outside Columbia, and the eggs had the square edges of something poured from a carton. Ruth examined hers. This doesn't look natural. It's 6 in the morning. Nothing should. Claire had also brought coffee. She put Ruth's cup by her right hand without being told. The small accuracy caught Ruth off guard. They started with the 6 months of statements Ruth had printed. Claire arranged them by date, then created 3 columns in the receipt book: farm, Dean, and unclear. You're writing in my good book, Ruth said. You bought it at the dollar store. It's still new. Claire pushed a pen toward her. Then you write. They worked side by side. A payment to Mid-State Equipment Finance belonged partly to the farm. The skid steer and dump trailer had been used on both operations. Charges at the veterinary supply store were obviously Ruth's. Concrete pipe looked like Dean's business until Ruth remembered that Walter had used 2 sections to replace a washed-out culvert. Fuel was hopeless. Walter had bought dyed diesel for farm equipment and regular diesel for Dean's trucks, sometimes on the same invoice. Dean occasionally reimbursed the farm. Sometimes his transfers were round numbers, without notes. Other times he had paid an exact invoice Ruth could match to a receipt. Your brother isn't stupid, Ruth said. Claire looked up from the calculator. Did you think he was? If a man is going to take money, I expect him to make the records harder to follow. Maybe he wasn't trying to hide it. The possibility irritated Ruth more than concealment would have. Then he thought he had a right to it. Probably. You sound very calm. I work in hospital billing. If I became emotional every time somebody put a charge in the wrong place, I'd be living under a bridge. Ruth entered another figure. What about Amy's check? Claire's fingers paused on the calculator. You know something. I know they've been separated since November. So do I. No, you know she moved into an apartment. You don't know why. Ruth waited. Claire turned the calculator off. Dean used the house as collateral when he bought the second excavator. He told me Amy agreed. She signed. That isn't the same as wanting to. Those papers would have explained what she was signing. Claire gave her a level look. Ruth glanced at Walter's note. All right, she said. Fair. Dean was supposed to pay Amy part of the equity when she moved out. He didn't have it, so they agreed on monthly payments. With farm money? I doubt she knew where the money came from. Ruth wrote AMY, Ask Dean, beneath the check amount. By noon, they had identified less than half the disputed spending. Some payments plainly benefited the farm. Some plainly did not. Most sat in the middle, muddied by years of family labors traded without bills, the borrowed equipment returned with empty tanks, and promises made over supper. Claire scanned each page and saved copies to a small drive. You trust machines more than paper? Ruth asked. I trust having both. What if that little thing falls in the sink? What if the barn catches fire? Why would the barn catch fire? Because Dad wired it. Ruth laughed before she could decide whether to defend him. The sound startled both women. Claire looked down, smiling faintly. He wired my first apartment, too. I slept with a fire extinguisher beside the bed. He drove 2 hours to do that. I know, and he didn't charge you. I know that, too. Grief entered the room without changing the light. For a while, the only noise was Claire sliding paper beneath the scanner lid. Ruth found a page from the previous October, showing a transfer from Mercer Excavation into the shared account. $10,000 from Dean, she said. Claire leaned over. What happened that month? The combine broke down. Could be his repayment, or he covered the repair. Either way, he put money in. Ruth marked the amount under Dean, then added a question mark. You thought I wanted him to be guilty, Claire said. I thought you did. I want him to stop deciding that his emergencies belong to everyone. That isn't an answer. Claire capped the pen. I don't want him ruined. I want him contained. The word made Ruth picture Dean as floodwater pressing against sandbags. He has done more for this farm than you know, she said. Claire's face did not harden. That would have been easier. I know exactly how much he's done, she said. You've been telling me since I left. Ruth looked at her daughter's hand resting near the receipt book. No wedding ring, no watch, nails cut short. Claire had built a life Ruth knew mainly through phone calls timed around work. You could have come back, Ruth said. There was always a reason Dean mattered more here. That is not true. Maybe not to you. The room went still. Ruth wanted to list the Christmases Claire had missed. Walter's surgery, the ice storm when Dean slept in the lambing barn to keep the water lines from freezing. All of it was true. None of it answered what Claire had said. From outside came the metallic bang of a tailgate. Dean had parked beside the porch. Claire closed the file box. Ruth placed her hand over the key in her pocket. Dean entered without knocking, carrying a cardboard banker's box. He stopped when he saw Claire. Of course, he said. Good morning to you too, Claire replied. He put the box on the table hard enough to rattle the coffee cups. Everything from my office that has to do with the farm. Ruth lifted the lid. Loose receipts filled half the box. Several were folded around bolts or washers. A spiral notebook sat on top, its cover stained with grease. You went through these? She asked. Most of them. Are they sorted? I had other things to do last night. Claire opened the notebook. Dean reached over and closed it. I brought this for Mom. She asked me to help. I bet she did. Ruth removed his hand from the cover. Sit down. I don't have time. Then stand quietly. He stared at her. She opened the notebook. Dates and machine hours filled the pages, some accompanied by job names. South Field appeared repeatedly. So did Mercer Farm, Shop, and simply Dad. This is useful, Ruth said. Dean's shoulders lowered by a fraction. We'll go through it, she continued. If the farm owes you, I'll account for that. If, the farm may also have paid expenses that belong to your company. His face tightened again. I told you we shared equipment. Then we need to know what was shared. That's not how Dad and I worked. No, I'm beginning to understand how you worked. Dean glanced at Walter's note. He recognized the handwriting immediately. You searched his desk. It is my desk. That account wasn't some secret scheme. Dad was helping me get through winter, with my crop, with our crop. Ruth felt something inside her go cold. Claire spoke before Ruth could. Whose name is on the land? Dean rounded on her. Stay out of it. Whose name? You've lived 2 hours away for 20 years. Don't show up with a calculator and pretend you understand this farm. I understand what the word "our" means when you say it. Enough, Ruth said. Neither of them stopped looking at the other. Ruth pushed back her chair and stood. Dean, your father and I own the land. I own it now. That does not erase the work you've done, and it does not make the crop yours. His cheeks had flushed red above his beard. Dad always said this place would come to me. Someday. What does that mean now? It means I'm still here. He stepped away from the table. What do you want? He asked. I want the grain money returned. It paid bills. Then give me a list of which bills and why the farm owed them. I can't pull $31,000 out of the air. You pulled it out of my account. The company will pay it back. When? After the county pays me. When is that? I don't know. Ruth nodded slowly. Then, until we settle this, no farm income goes through Mercer operations. Fine. I'm removing you as an authorized signer on the farm checking account. Dean laughed once without humor. You don't even know how to run the online banking. I'm capable of learning. Planting starts in a month. I know what month it is. You think paying bills is the same as running this place? No, I think paying bills is part of it. He looked at Claire. This your idea? Ruth answered for her. Mine. Dean picked up his truck keys from the table, though Ruth had not seen him put them there. You want to run it alone? He said. Go ahead. I didn't say alone. You don't have anybody else. The cruelty came out quietly, almost with regret. Ruth did not look at Claire. She would not use her daughter as proof. Any work you do from now on, Ruth said, we agree to beforehand. You give me an estimate. I pay you a fair rate. Every part has a receipt. Dean shook his head. You want to turn family into a transaction. You did that when you deposited the grain check. For several seconds he stood in Walter's kitchen with the banker's box between them. Then he reached into his pocket and placed a brass key on the table. Machine shed, he said. Ruth knew the key. Its square head was worn smooth from years on his ring. You don't have to do that. You just told me I need permission to work here. I told you we need terms. Same thing? He walked out. Claire moved toward the window, but Ruth stayed by the table. Dean's truck started, backed around the gravel circle, and headed down the lane without spraying stones this time. The brass key lay on top of Walter's note. Ruth picked it up. It was warm from Dean's pocket. He'll come back, Claire said. Ruth closed her fingers around it. Outside, the North tractor waited in the open-sided shed with a bucket beneath its hydraulic leak. The winter wheat needed checking. The planter had not been serviced. In the barn, one of the newborn lambs had begun coughing that morning. Ruth looked at the box of unsorted receipts, then at the whiteboard visible through the machine shed window. Filters, front tire, auger bearing, call Hollis. She set Dean's key beside her own. Help me make a list, she said. Claire found a legal pad in the drawer beside the stove and wrote farm across the top. Immediate or everything, she asked. Everything becomes immediate if you neglect it long enough. That sounds like Dad. It was usually about dental work. They began in the lambing barn. The coughing lamb had a clear nose and enough energy to object when Ruth held it, which she took as a good sign. Claire wrote temperature, watch breathing, call vet if worse. You can take out the last part, Ruth said. I know when to call Len. It's on the list for me. You're going home, eventually. Ruth looked at her. You have work Monday. I'm aware of how calendars function. They moved through the machine shed, where Claire added filters, tire, hydraulic return line, planter inspection, auger bearing, and 3 other items Ruth spotted once she began looking. A seed monitor sat on Walter's workbench with its cover removed, red and yellow wires showing like exposed veins. Does that work? Claire asked. It did last year. That was not my question. Ruth bent close. Walter had left 2 screws in a magnetic tray and 1 on the bench. He believed every machine contained an unnecessary screw. Sometimes, after putting something back together, he would hold up whatever remained and say the manufacturer had included a spare. Put a question mark, Ruth said. In the equipment office, Dean's whiteboard still carried his list. Claire copied it, then paused beneath call Hollis. Why was Dean supposed to call him? Probably about the grain contract, or seed. Hollis doesn't sell seed. Claire drew a line through the item. Then you call him. Ruth disliked seeing Dean's instruction crossed out. It felt petty, almost ceremonial. She picked up the eraser and removed the whole list. The faint shadows of his block letters remained on the board. They worked until late afternoon. When Claire finally put on her coat, the legal pad held 37 entries divided into now, before planting, summer, and house. Claire had added patch porch paint. Ruth had moved it to summer. Claire moved it back. You'll trip on that curled piece, she said. I have stepped over it for 6 years. An excellent reason to keep doing it. Ruth folded the top of the page to hide the house section. At the door, Claire hesitated. Do you want me here Monday? For the bank? Yes. No. Claire accepted that too quickly. Ruth added, but keep your phone on. I always do. Except during work. I work at a hospital. They possess telephones. Ruth almost said she knew that, but Claire's face suggested otherwise. After her car disappeared, the farmhouse grew large around Ruth. She washed both coffee cups, dried them, and put Claire's in the cabinet. Then she took it back out and left it beside the sink, as though her daughter might return before morning. Dean did not call. At 8, Ruth checked the lamb again. At 9, she checked the back door lock. At 10, she opened the online banking page and practiced signing in 3 times. The site wanted to send a security code to Walter's phone. His phone was in the top drawer of Ruth's dresser, powered off. She charged it on the nightstand and waited while the screen lit with old notifications. Weather alerts, a missed call from Ben Talley, 3 reminders to update the operating system. Walter's background photograph showed Ruth asleep in the passenger seat of their truck, mouth open, one hand clutching a gas station coffee. "That old fool," she whispered. She entered the security code and changed the number to her own. At the bank Monday morning, Nora Haskell greeted Ruth in the lobby and touched both her hands. "I was so sorry about Walter. He always made me explain interest rates twice, then told me he understood them the first time. He liked to know if you did." Nora laughed, then seemed uncertain whether laughing was allowed. She had managed the branch for 12 years and still wore the same tortoiseshell glasses Ruth remembered from the day she and Walter refinanced the South acreage. They sat in Nora's glass-walled office. Ruth placed the farm checkbook, Walter's death certificate, and the legal pad on the desk. "I need to change the signers on the farm checking account." Nora's professional expression settled into place. "All right. Walter was primary, and you and Dean were both authorized. I want Dean removed." Nora glanced at the lobby, though Dean was nowhere near it. "Has there been a problem?" "Yes." Ruth waited for her to ask whether she understood what she was doing. Nora only turned to her computer. "Because you're the surviving owner, you can make that change. We'll close the current account and open a new one in your name. That's safer than simply removing access. Will that stop checks already written?" "No. We'll review anything outstanding." "Do you have reason to believe there are checks you don't know about?" Ruth thought of the Mercer operations account, where farm income and company money moved together until neither had a clean edge. "I don't know," she said. "That's why I'm here." Nora printed a list of automatic withdrawals. The combined note, electric bill, property insurance, and farm credit payment were familiar. 2 software subscriptions were not. "What is AgTrack Pro?" Ruth asked. "Farm management software." "We don't use farm management software." Nora turned the monitor toward her. "The charge began 8 months ago." Ruth wrote it down. The second subscription belonged to a fleet tracking service Dean used on his trucks. $39 a month. Small enough to escape notice. Large enough to irritate her. "Can I dispute that?" "You can ask the company to move it. If it was authorized, it may not be refundable. No instant recovery. No button marked, 'Give it back.' Only phone calls, dates, names, and patient explanations." Ruth opened the receipt book and wrote Nora's name beside the account change. Then she listed the checks that would need replacing. Nora watched her. "Would you like online statements only?" "Paper and online." "There's a monthly fee for paper." "How much?" $3. "Paper." Nora smiled. Walter said the same thing. "I am not saying it for Walter." The smile disappeared. "Of course." Ruth regretted the sharpness, but she let the silence stand. People had begun handing her husband's habits back to her as though they were keepsakes she ought to wear. Before leaving, she deposited a livestock check that had arrived in Saturday's mail. She made Nora stamp the receipt. In the parking lot, Ruth called Hollis. He answered on the second ring. "Mercer Co-op. It's Ruth." A pause, no more than a heartbeat. "Morning, Ruth. I need the deposit instructions changed for all future payments. Nothing goes to Mercer Operations." "All right. And I want a copy of the authorization that sent the last payment there." Another pause. Hollis lowered his voice. "Dean brought in the form last fall. Walter signed it." Ruth closed her eyes against the brightness of the parking lot. "Did I?" "No." "Then send me a copy. I can do that." "Today?" "Yes, ma'am." "And Hollis, yes? If I come in asking about my account, answer me. Do not call my son unless I ask you to." His shame came through the line. "I'm sorry, Ruth." She believed him. That did not make the apology less necessary. "I'll expect the form," she said. The North tractor had leaked another 2 inches of hydraulic fluid into the bucket by the time she returned home. Ruth stood over it with the legal pad. The machine was 26 years old, sun faded along the hood, with a driver's seat split down the middle. Walter had refused to replace it because the engine was sound. Dean had argued that a sound engine surrounded by failing parts was just a more expensive way to stand still. Ruth took out her phone and called Ben Talley. He answered with, "Who died? That is a terrible way to answer your telephone. People who like me use my mobile. This is your mobile." A beat passed. "Ruth, the North Tractor is leaking. It was leaking when Nixon was president. We bought it in 1999. Then it has an old soul. Will you look at it?" Ben did not answer immediately. Wind blew across his receiver. "Walter know you're calling?" he asked. "Walter is still dead. I heard. Doesn't mean he wouldn't object. Are you going to make me apologize for him?" "No, I'm going to charge you for him. By the hour? That's how work generally goes. Then come by." Ben arrived in a faded green truck carrying a tool bag and 2 pairs of glasses. He wore one pair to look at the tractor and the other to read the model number printed on the hydraulic line. Ruth held the flashlight while he crawled beneath the rear housing. "This bucket's a nice touch," he said. "It's temporary." "Since when?" "August. Temporary gets comfortable around here." He worked the line loose, wiped the fitting, and whistled through his teeth. "Return lines cracked, couplers worn, tire needs replacing before you put weight on it. That's on my list." "What else is on your list?" "None of your business? Then hold the light steadier." She did. When he climbed out, his jacket was streaked with oil. He studied the planter parked in the next bay. "Dean servicing that?" "No." Ben looked toward the house. "He sick?" "No." "Jail?" Ben. Just narrowing the field. Ruth told him they had disagreed about the accounts. She did not mention the word confused. It still felt too raw to place in another person's mouth. Ben rubbed oil between his thumb and forefinger. "Planting window won't wait for family peace." "I know. You got seed booked?" Walter did. "Fertilizer, I assume?" "Don't assume with fertilizer." Ruth added it to the legal pad. Ben nodded toward the receipt book tucked under her arm. "You keeping score?" "I'm keeping records. Same thing in most marriages. We are not married. That's why we still speak." He gave her an estimate for the tractor repair, writing each part on a sheet torn from a carbon invoice book. Ruth read it twice. "You charge $40 for coming out? My truck runs on fuel, not admiration. Walter said you overcharged." Walter thought anybody who made a profit was cheating him personally. He made a profit. Exactly. Ruth signed the estimate. Ben tore off the yellow copy and handed it to her. "First one's free. The estimate says $40. The joke was free." She slipped the paper into her receipt book. Before leaving, Ben stood beside the planter and turned one of the gauge wheels with his boot. It wobbled visibly. "You're not putting seed in with this until somebody goes through it," he said. "Can you?" "I repair engines. Planters require optimism and smaller hands." "Who?" "Dean." "No." Ben considered her face and did not ask again. "Mara and Luis Bell might," he said. "They're renting the Crawford ground east of you. Good operators. I know who they are. Then you know they're trying to pick up acres. I am not renting out my farm. I didn't say you were. You were thinking it loudly." Ben lifted both hands. "Have them inspect the planter, pay them for their time. After that, do whatever stubborn thing makes you happiest." Ruth watched his green truck leave, then looked toward the fields. Winter wheat lay in dull rows along the lower ground. Beyond it, bare corn stubble reached toward the creek. Walter and Dean had planted every acre together for 23 years. Ruth opened the receipt book and filed Ben's estimate behind the first page. Then she took out her phone. Mara Bell answered cautiously, as if Ruth might be calling to complain about a fence. "Mrs. Mercer?" "Ruth," she said, "and I'd like to hire you and Luis for an inspection." "I can do tomorrow afternoon," Mara said. "Luis has a dentist appointment in the morning. You don't have to bring your dental records." A small silence followed. Then Mara laughed. "Ben told me you were direct. Ben thinks politeness is a conspiracy." "He said that too." Ruth gave her directions she knew Mara did not need, and wrote the appointment on the legal pad. The next afternoon, Mara arrived in a silver pickup with a dented tailgate. Luis climbed out carrying a socket set and a canvas bag. Both wore work clothes clean enough to suggest they had changed before coming. Mara was tall and angular, with black hair pulled through the back of a cap. Luis was shorter, broad through the shoulders, and moved with a carefulness Ruth associated with men who had injured their backs once and learned the lesson. "You didn't have to dress up," Ruth said. Luis looked at his boots. "These are my church overalls." Mara nudged him with one elbow. "Ignore him. I intend to." They followed Ruth into the machine shed. The planter seemed to become more tired under 3 sets of eyes. Its red paint had faded to a chalky pink. Dust coated the seed boxes, and one closing wheel leaned at an angle that was not part of the design. Luis crouched beside the first row unit. When was this run last? Last spring. Any trouble? Walter said it pulled a little to the right. Mara looked down the length of the machine. A little? He also said his blood pressure was a little high. Luis pressed the gauge wheel and watched the play in the bearing. This one's gone, that one's thinking about it. For the next hour, they moved from row to row. Luis called out problems. Mara wrote them on the back of Ben's estimate until Ruth handed her the legal pad. Use a clean page, Ruth said. I can write around things. I want to know what I'm paying for. Mara glanced at the receipt book under Ruth's arm, but made no comment. They found cracked seed tubes, worn disc openers, 2 weak springs, and mouse damage in the monitor cable. The monitor itself powered on when Luis connected it to the tractor, then displayed a row of 8s and began beeping continuously. It's optimistic, he said over the noise. Ruth shut it off. What will it cost? She asked. Luis and Mara exchanged a look. That is never a look people make before saying a pleasant number, Ruth said. If we do the labor, Mara said, and if we can find used parts for some of it, maybe $3,800. Could go over $5,000. Ruth stared at the planter. Walter had bought it used 12 years earlier for $9,000. He had spent every winter threatening to replace it and every spring insisting it had one more season. Can it plant? She asked. Anything can plant, Luis said. Question is what comes up. Mara leaned against the frame. You've got 146 row crop acres, right? 142 this year. 4 are in hay. What are you putting in? Corn on 80, beans on the rest? Seed booked? I'm checking. Fertilizer? Also checking. Mara nodded without judgment, which felt suspiciously like judgment. Ruth folded her arms. I hired you to inspect the planter? Yes, ma'am. Ruth. The inspection is done. Luis wiped his hands on a rag. We can give you the parts list. No charge. There is a charge. We were here an hour. That is generally how time works. Mara smiled. Ben warned us. If Ben continues describing me to people, I'm going to bill him for advertising. Ruth wrote them a check for $75. Mara tried to refuse it until Ruth tore it from the book and held it out. If I hire you, I pay you, Mara accepted. Then we'll give you a receipt. They were loading their tools when Dean's truck turned into the yard. Ruth recognized the sound before she saw it, the low rattle under the exhaust he had meant to fix all winter. He parked beside Mara's pickup and got out slowly. His eyes went from Mara to Luis, then to the planter. What's going on? I hired them to inspect it, Ruth said. Dean walked into the shed and picked up the parts list. You hired them. Yes, you could have called me. You left your key on my kitchen table. That didn't mean I wanted you paying strangers to go through Dad's equipment. Luis straightened. We should probably head out. No, Ruth said. You haven't given me the receipt. Mara took a small book from the truck and began writing. Dean dropped the parts list on the workbench. Half this stuff can wait. Which half? The disc openers have another season. Luis studied the concrete floor. Ruth said, he measured them. Did he? Luis looked up. They're under 13.5. Dean's jaw tightened. They'll run. They'll run, Luis agreed. The phrase carried none of the reassurance Dean wanted from it. Mara handed Ruth the receipt. Ruth placed it in her book and wrote planter inspection beside the date. Dean watched her. What is that? My record. You don't need to write down every $75 check. I do now. Color rose along his neck. Mara touched Luis's sleeve. Thank you, Ruth. Dean stepped aside to let them pass, but he did it late enough that Luis had to turn his shoulders. Mara's truck rolled out of the yard without hurry. They've been after more ground for 2 years, Dean said. They were looking at a planter. They were looking at your fields. You told me I had nobody else. I didn't mean invite every renter in the county. I invited 2 people I hired. Dean picked up a worn opener disc and spun it. I came to tell you the fertilizer dealer needs payment by Friday. Which dealer? Carson Ag. How much? $22,000? Ruth felt the figure in her chest. For what? Pre-plant nitrogen, dry fertilizer, application. Is there an invoice? Probably. Where? I don't know. Dad booked it. Did you? We were both there. Where is the invoice, Dean? He threw the disc onto the workbench. It landed with a flat clang. This is what I'm talking about. You're chasing paper while the season's moving. If $22,000 is moving, I would like to see where. Call Carson. I will. He wants payment because you cut me off the account. We had terms before. Then the farm will apply for its own terms. Dean laughed. Based on what operating history? You closed the account we used. I changed my checking account. You made it clear I'm not part of this. You made that clear when you gave back the key. He looked at the tractor, the planter, the erased whiteboard. Something in his face shifted from anger to alarm. Mom, you cannot plant this farm by yourself. I have never claimed I could. Then what are you doing? Finding out what it takes. We know what it takes. Me and Dad knew. And neither of you wrote it down. For once, Dean had no answer. He reached into the bed of his truck and lifted out a plastic tote filled with unopened mail. More records, he said. Some of the bills might be late. How late? I don't know. You keep saying that. Because I have a business to run. With my grain money, his face hardened. I came here to help. You came here to warn me about a bill without bringing the bill. Dean shoved the tote onto the workbench. Carson closes at 5. It was 4:20. Ruth took the truck keys from her pocket. Carson Ag occupied a low metal building 12 miles west of town. Ruth arrived at 4:53 and found Earl Carson locking the side gate. He was 72, red-faced, and permanently bent forward as if walking into a strong wind. You could have called, he said. I did. Your phone rang. My hearing aids don't like the forklift. Inside, Earl found the Mercer folder beneath a stack of seed catalogs. The invoice was for $21,742.36. Ruth read each line. This acreage is wrong. Earl leaned over. That's what Dean gave us. It includes the Crawford 40. He said you were picking it up. We are not. Earl scratched his cheek. Walter was talking about it. Walter talked about buying a fishing boat for 30 years. This was more specific. Ruth drew a line through the extra acreage. Recalculate it, Earl did, muttering at the computer. The amount dropped to $16,308.11. And this application fee? Custom spreading. Can we do it ourselves? You got a working spreader? Ruth thought of the rusting hopper behind the hay shed. No, then no. She asked about payment terms. Earl removed his glasses and wiped them on his shirt. Dean said there was trouble with the farm account. What kind of trouble? Just said I ought not carry the balance. So now you want all of it Friday. I'm not taking sides. You are choosing when to be nervous. Earl looked embarrassed. I've got suppliers too. Ruth understood that. Understanding did not put $16,000 into the account. What happens if I cancel? Lose the deposit on the nitrogen? You can cut the potash, but your soil test was already low last fall. Show me the test. He found it. Ruth stayed until 5:30, going line by line while Earl's wife Denise turned off lights around them. In the end, Ruth reduced the order but did not solve the payment. She left with an adjusted invoice, the soil report, and a receipt showing Walter had paid a $3,000 deposit in December. At home, the tote of mail waited on the workbench. So did the planter, needing at least $3,800 before it could put seed into ground that required another $13,000 before anything sensible could grow. Ruth carried the papers into the kitchen and entered every amount in the receipt book. Then she added the farm credit payment, insurance, seed estimate, fuel, repairs, and the wages she would owe if she hired someone to plant. The total was not impossible. That was almost worse. It was close enough to tempt her into risking every dollar she had available, with no room for drought, breakdown, or bad prices. She called Mara. I'm not offering you my farm, Ruth said when she answered. All right, I may be willing to discuss one season. Mara waited, the row crop acres only. The sheep, orchard, hay ground, and buildings stay mine. We can discuss that. You and Luis bring your own equipment. You pay your own inputs. Nothing is agreed until I see the numbers in writing. Understood. And Dean does not speak for me. This time, Mara's silence held no caution. Understood, she said again. Ruth looked through the dark kitchen window toward the fields Walter had always called Dean's future. Come tomorrow, she said, both of you. Mara and Luis arrived at 9 with a laptop, 2 travel mugs, and a 3-page proposal. Ruth had cleared the kitchen table except for Walter's note. She considered putting it away, then left it beside the salt shaker. Let the dead hear the terms, too. No coffee? Luis asked. You brought coffee. This is gas station coffee. It may be antifreeze. Ruth filled the percolator while Mara opened the laptop. We pulled the county soil maps, Mara said. The creek ground stays wet longer than the rest. It dries if the west ditch is clear. Is it? No. Luis took a cautious drink from his travel mug. We can clean it. For free? He lowered the mug. I see how this meeting is going. Ruth sat across from them. How much an acre? Mara gave a number lower than Ruth expected and higher than she feared. Half payable when the lease was signed, the balance after harvest. The Bells would pay for seed, fertilizer, chemicals, fuel, equipment, and labor on the 142 acres intended for corn and soybeans. Ruth would remain responsible for property taxes, perimeter fences, and drainage repairs over $500. What about the wheat? Ruth asked. Mara glanced at Luis. We could harvest it for you at a custom rate, Luis said, or include those 18 acres and credit you for what's already in the crop. Walter paid for the seed. Then we credit the documented seed and fertilizer costs. Ruth appreciated the word documented. She did not appreciate how few documents she possessed. The wheat stays mine, she said. You harvest it. I pay the standard rate. I want the grain sold in my name. Fair, Mara said. Not yet, it isn't. We haven't named the rate. They named it. The discussion lasted 3 hours. Ruth asked what happened if spring floods delayed planting, if the Bells damaged a fence, if they used the bulk fuel tank, if either party wanted out. Mara answered without impatience. Luis occasionally disagreed with her, especially about whether they should repair the west ditch themselves. You're underpricing your labor, Mara told him. It's one ditch. It's a half mile. It needs cleaned anyway. Then put a number on it. Ruth watched them argue in low voices, neither performing unity for her benefit. Walter had often treated disagreement as disloyalty until Ruth gave up and let him discover her objections later. Mara and Luis treated it as part of arithmetic. Put a number on it, Ruth said. Luis sighed. I liked you better before coffee. They agreed that the Bells would clear the ditch in exchange for a credit against the second rent payment after Ruth inspected the work. No relatives, no favors, no someday. When they reached the fertilizer order, Ruth showed them Earl Carson's adjusted invoice and the receipt for Walter's deposit. We use Carson, Mara said. He can transfer the order to us. He said the deposit is non-refundable. It won't need refunding, Luis said. We'll use the nitrogen. Ruth turned the receipt around. Then you reimburse the farm for the deposit. Mara nodded, at signing, and put it separately from the rent. We can do that. Why? Luis asked, sounding curious rather than resistant. Because if it's separate, nobody has to remember what was included. Luis considered this. I'm going to start doing that. Mara gave him a look. I've been asking you to start doing that for 6 years. Yes, but Ruth explained it. That is not a safe sentence in any marriage, Ruth said. They all laughed, and the kitchen altered around the sound. Not much. Just enough that Walter's empty chair stopped being the only thing in the room. Mara had printed a standard 1-year lease. Ruth read every paragraph, then called Claire and put her on speaker. You want me to review a farm lease during my lunch break? Claire asked. You said the hospital possessed telephones. Mara covered a smile with her hand. Claire asked precise questions about insurance, access to buildings, environmental responsibility, and early termination. She did not tell Ruth what to do. At the end, she said, It looks ordinary. Is that good? In contracts, ordinary is wonderful. They agreed to meet 2 days later, after the Bells added the terms they had discussed. Ruth did not let them leave the proposal behind until Mara wrote draft across every page. When the door closed, the farm seemed to exhale. Ruth walked to the edge of the nearest field. Corn stalks from the previous year broke under her boots. A red-winged blackbird clung to the fence wire, flashing its shoulders when it lifted away. Walter had first rented this ground from his uncle. He and Ruth had bought the home tract after 7 years of saving and arguments, then added acreage in pieces. Ruth had worked nights at a nursing home during the worst of it. She had come home at 7 in the morning, changed clothes, fed lambs, and slept until noon. Nobody had called that contribution farming. Dean's truck appeared on the county road and slowed at the lane. For one hopeful moment, Ruth thought he might turn in. He continued past. The next morning, Earl Carson called while Ruth was pruning dead wood from the oldest apple tree. Mara Bell says they're taking over your fertilizer order. That's right. And the Mercer deposit gets credited to their account. They will reimburse me. She said that? Then why are you calling? Earl cleared his throat. Dean came by yesterday, told me not to move anything until he talked to you. Ruth lowered the pruning saw. You are talking to me. He seemed to think you might change your mind. I might. Until then, my instructions are the instructions. Ruth, I don't want to get in the middle. You keep finding the middle and standing in it. The orchard was quiet except for the scrape of a branch against another branch. Earl sighed. I'll transfer the order. Send me a statement showing the deposit credit. You want it mailed? Mail and email. You sound like Nora Haskell. Nora has clear records. That was not a compliment. It is now. After the call, Ruth examined the tree. Water sprouts crowded its center, reaching straight up. Walter hated pruning because cutting healthy-looking wood seemed wasteful to him. Ruth had told him for years that light needed a path through the branches. He always promised to do it next winter. The 4-acre orchard had once produced enough apples to stock their farm stand and supply 2 local restaurants. In recent years, Walter's illness and Ruth's care for him had reduced the work to mowing between rows and harvesting whatever survived pests, deer, and neglect. Several trees needed replacing. The stand by the road leaned slightly east, its roof patched with a faded feed tarp. Ruth cut another water sprout. By noon, her shoulder ached. She had cleared half of one tree. There were 83. She sat on an overturned picking crate and opened the lunch she had packed. Cheese, an apple from cold storage gone soft at one side, and 2 cookies Claire had left in the freezer. Her phone buzzed. Dean had sent one line. Heard you rented Dad's ground to the Bells. Ruth typed, my ground. She erased it. She typed, 1 season, call me. She erased that too. Finally, she put the phone face down on the crate and ate the soft part of the apple first. The lease arrived by email that evening. Ruth printed it and read it at the kitchen table. The printer jammed on page 4. She removed the crumpled sheet, smoothed it, and printed again. The Bells had added every agreed term. They had also added a clause giving Ruth access to the fields with reasonable notice, except when machinery was operating. She called Mara. I don't need permission to walk my own land. No, Mara said. But if Luis is spraying or backing equipment, he needs to know you're there. Ruth pictured herself flattened beneath a tractor because she had been defending a principle. Leave it, she said. At the signing, Mara brought a cashier's check for half the rent, and a separate check for the fertilizer deposit. Luis brought a receipt acknowledging that the Bells had taken over the order. Ruth brought 2 blue pens. They signed at the kitchen table. Dean arrived while Ruth was making copies. He did not knock. His gaze landed on Mara and Luis, then on the signed pages beside the printer. You did it. Ruth set the top copy on the table. I did, after one conversation. After several conversations and a written agreement. Dean looked at Mara. Crawford ground, not enough for you? Mara rose. We didn't come looking for this. No, you just happened to be standing in the machine shed when she got scared. Louis stood too, slower. Ruth stepped between the table and her son. They came because I hired them. You could have hired me. I tried to set terms. You left. You accused me of stealing. I asked you to account for money. Dean pointed at the lease. So, you hand the whole operation to them? 142 acres for 1 season. That is the operation. No, it is land. His face altered as though she had denied something sacred. Dad would never have done this. Your father is part of why I had to. Mara gathered the Bells' copy. We should go. This time Ruth let them. Dean waited until their truck pulled away. Then he took a ring of keys from his pocket and removed 2 small ones. Fuel tank and tool cage, he said, setting them down. Are you collecting your equipment? Whatever belongs to me. Make a list. He gave a bitter laugh. Of course. I'm serious. If you take something, we both sign the list. You think I'm going to steal a wrench? I think after 20 years of sharing, neither of us knows whose wrench it is. He looked toward the office where Walter's tools hung above the workbench. That's what you wanted, isn't it? He asked. Everything divided up. Everybody paid. Nobody owing anybody. What I wanted was to trust my son. The anger left him so quickly that Ruth nearly reached for him. Then Dean said, "You trusted Dad." It was not a defense. It was a wound placed carefully between them. He went to the machine shed. Ruth followed with the legal pad. For 2 hours, they sorted chains, sockets, power tools, grease guns, tie-down straps, and equipment manuals. Dean identified what his company had purchased. Ruth asked for receipts when he had them, and accepted his word when the claim made sense. He did the same for her. At the bottom of a cabinet, they found Walter's old torque wrench in a cracked red case. "Mine," Dean said. "Your father bought it before you could drive. He gave it to me." "When?" Dean's hand rested on the case. "The day I bought my first backhoe." Ruth had not been there. She could not prove he was wrong. She wrote, "Torque wrench, gift from Walter," and handed him the case. By sunset, the bed of Dean's truck was full. He signed the list. Ruth signed beneath him and tore off the carbon copy. Dean folded it into his wallet without looking at her. After he left, empty outlines remained on the pegboard where his tools had hung. Ruth stood alone in the machine shed, listening to his truck fade down the road. Then she returned to the kitchen, deposited the Bell's checks through the bank application Claire had shown her, and filed the confirmation with the lease. The first rent payment covered the tractor repair, the planter debt she no longer had to incur, and the overdue bills in Dean's tote. It did not restore what had gone into Mercer operations. Ruth did not write victory anywhere. She wrote balance. The balance changed again the next morning. Ben charged $612 for the hydraulic line, coupler, fluid, and labor. Ruth stood beside the tractor while he explained each entry on the invoice. "What is shop supplies?" she asked. "Rags, solvent, language." "You charge for language?" "Specialized vocabulary." She paid him, filed the receipt, and watched him drive the North tractor around the yard. No fluid dripped into the bucket. The clean concrete beneath it pleased her more than it should have. 3 days later, Mara and Luis began planting corn. Their equipment arrived before dawn, a newer tractor than anything the Mercers owned, a 12-row planter, a seed tender, and Luis's pickup towing a fuel tank. Ruth made coffee and carried a thermos to the field entrance. Mara climbed down from the tractor. "You called first." The lease said reasonable notice. "I didn't mean you had to ask permission to bring coffee. I am respecting the contract. You are proving a point. Would you like coffee or not?" Mara took the thermos. "I respect the contract." Ruth stood at the edge of the field as the planter unfolded. Walter and Dean had used a 6-row machine. Their planting took days of stops, repairs, and arguments conducted through hand signals nobody else understood. Luis made one pass along the headland, turned, and returned with the rows straight behind him. It was efficient. Ruth disliked it immediately. By noon, she had found 6 reasons to drive the utility cart past the field. She checked the creek fence, delivered more coffee, picked up an empty seed bag that did not need immediate attention, and warned Luis about a wet pocket he had already marked on his screen. On her 7th pass, Mara flagged her down. "We found a tile blowout near the south end," she said. "I know. You knew? It's been there since last summer. Then why didn't you tell us?" Ruth looked across the field. The low patch showed only as a slight darkening of soil. "I forgot." Mara waited. Ruth did not like the waiting. "I was busy," she added. "We can work around it. But put it on the drainage list." "I have a list," I assumed. Mara smiled, taking some of the sting out of it. Ruth drove home and wrote tile blowout, south field beneath the ditch repair. Then she added, "Tell people what they need to know." She crossed that out before anyone saw it. Without row crops to manage, her days did not become empty. They changed shape. She lammed the last 4 ewes, repaired portable fencing, and hired a shearer instead of waiting for Dean and Walter's old friend to arrange it. She paid for hoof trimming because her back no longer tolerated holding a full-grown ewe between her knees. Each decision cost money and preserved something in her body she had previously spent without counting. The orchard demanded more. Ruth pruned until her shoulder throbbed, then called Mara and asked if she knew anyone who could help. "We can," Mara said, "if you're paying. I am always paying. Not everybody says that." Mara and Luis came on 2 evenings after field work. They cleared suckers, hauled brush, and opened the centers of trees that had grown crowded. Ruth taught them where to cut. "Not flush," she told Luis. "Leave the collar." He moved the saw 1/2 inch. Here, do you want the tree to heal, or do you want to express yourself? Mara laughed from the next row. She's got you there. By the second evening, Luis had improved enough that Ruth only corrected him twice. He still asked before every large cut. When Ruth wrote their check, Mara studied the amount. This is too much. It includes hauling. We hauled brush to your burn pile. You used your truck. We were already here. That is how favors start breeding. Mara looked at Luis. We might have found someone more difficult than you. Impossible, he said. Claire arrived the first Saturday in May, wearing old jeans and carrying cleaning supplies. You own cleaning supplies, Ruth said. I own better ones. They attacked the farm stand. The little roadside building had not opened in 4 years. Dust filmed the shelves. Wasps had built nests in both upper corners, and a raccoon had torn open a box of paper sacks, leaving the floor covered in brown shreds. Claire stood in the doorway. This is cheerful. It used to be. I remember. Ruth found an old chalkboard beneath a tarp. Walter had written Honey Crisp $2 per pound across it in faded white letters. Though the price belonged to another decade, Claire touched the writing. Are you reopening? If there's enough fruit. That wasn't what I asked. Ruth had begun to recognize the family habit of asking one question and then accusing the answer of dishonesty. I want to, she said. Claire nodded. Then we should see if the refrigerator still works. It did not. Neither did the sink pump. The roof leaked around 2 nails. One window had rotted along the sill, and the front counter sagged. They made another list. At lunch, they sat on the stand's narrow porch eating ham sandwiches while cars passed on the county road. Dean used to sell apples out here with me, Ruth said. Claire took a drink of tea. He ate more than he sold. You stole quarters from the cash box. I borrowed them. For what? The vending machine at work. You were 23. The vending machine did not accept personal checks. Ruth smiled. Your father knew. Claire turned to her. He did? He kept replacing the quarters with ones from his dresser. A laugh broke out of Claire, then softened. I thought I was getting away with something. You were. I didn't know until he told me. They watched a grain truck roll by, its tires humming on the pavement. Did Dad tell you about Dean's business problems? Claire asked. Not enough. He didn't tell me anything. You sound offended. I'm trying to figure out whether he protected Dean or protected himself. Ruth picked a crumb from the paper around her sandwich. Probably both. Claire looked at her, surprised. What? Nothing. That is never true when you say it. Claire folded her sandwich paper into a neat square. You're allowed to be angry at him. I know. Do you? Ruth looked through the open door at Walter's chalk writing. Anger at the dead had no place to land. It could not change his mind or force him to sit at the kitchen table while she asked why her own work had not entitled her to the truth. It moved through the house instead, lighting on his glasses, his coat, the dent his boots had worn into the porch step. I loved him, Ruth said. I know. He loved me. I know that too. Then stop looking as if one of those things cancels the rest. Claire's face tightened. I'm not. You are waiting for me to discover my marriage was a mistake. No. Claire's voice sharpened. I'm waiting for you to admit it hurt people. The old reflex rose in Ruth. Explain, Walter. Defend Dean. List the practical reasons each decision had been made. She swallowed it with cold tea. It did, she said. Claire looked away quickly. They spent the afternoon scraping paint. By late May, green fruit no larger than marbles showed on the apple branches. Corn emerged in narrow rows. The Bells repaired the west ditch and sent Ruth photographs before and after. She walked the full length with Luis, then signed the inspection line on their invoice. Dean had not returned. His company trucks sometimes passed on the county road. Once, Ruth saw his red jacket through a windshield. She lifted her hand, but the truck belonged to one of his employees. Amy called on a rainy Tuesday. I heard you wanted to ask me about a check, she said. Ruth sat at the kitchen table with the receipt book open. $4,800. From the operations account. That was Dean's payment to me. Did you know it came from farm income? Amy was quiet. No, she said. Ruth believed her. What was it for? Part of what he owes me on the house. Claire told me. Of course she did. She was trying to explain the record. I'm not angry at Claire. The fact that Amy specified the name told Ruth she was angry at someone. I am trying to sort what belongs where, Ruth said. Amy exhaled. Dean has always believed he can move money from the place it is to the place it needs to be. Walter admired that when it worked, and when it didn't, they both found someone else to carry the weighting. Ruth wrote AMY personal Dean beside the amount. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" Ruth considered several answers. None seemed large enough. For not asking sooner. Amy thanked her quietly and ended the call. The rain continued for 3 days. On the 4th evening, the air turned yellow. Ruth stood on the back porch watching clouds build in the west. The sheep had stopped grazing and gathered near the barn. Leaves showed their pale undersides. Her weather radio crackled with a severe thunderstorm warning and wind estimates that made her turn toward the orchard. She called Mara. "We've already shut down," Mara said. "Luis is securing the fuel tank. The sheep are in. What about you?" "I'm looking at the sky." "Go inside." "I have been looking at weather longer than you've been alive." Then you know what it does to people standing on porches. The first gust lifted dust from the driveway in a gray sheet. Ruth went inside. The storm struck 10 minutes later. Rain hit the west windows so hard the glass trembled. The power failed. Something heavy scraped across the roof, followed by a crash from the yard. Ruth crouched in the interior hallway with the weather radio against her ear. The house shuddered under a gust. For 1 second, she heard Walter's voice saying the old roof had held this long. Then the pressure eased. Rain softened to a steady drumming. Ruth waited until the radio said the strongest winds had moved east. Outside, branches covered the yard. Part of the lambing barn roof lay twisted against the fence. Tin roofing hung from the remaining rafters, lifting and slamming in the wind. The sheep crowded into the far corner, frightened but upright. Beyond the barn, 2 of the oldest apple trees had fallen across the farm stand. One trunk had crushed the porch. The other rested through the roof Walter had patched with feed tarp. Ruth stood in the rain, unable to decide which damage to approach first. Headlights turned into the lane. A red jacket emerged from the truck before the engine stopped. Dean ran toward her carrying a chainsaw. "Don't start that saw." Dean stopped with one hand on the pull cord. "The tree's on the building. The roof is wet. The trunk is under tension. And I don't know where the power line fell." He looked toward the dark yard. "Main line comes in by the house. And the farm stand line runs underground from the barn." He set the saw down. Ruth almost thanked him. Instead, she pointed toward the lambing barn. "Check the breaker before you touch metal." Dean ran to the service panel, while Ruth opened the gate. The sheep pressed away from the damaged roof, eyes bright in the beam of her flashlight. A sheet of tin lifted above them with every gust and slammed back against the rafters. "Power's off at the barn," Dean called. "We need them out." Machine shed, West Bay. They found portable panels stacked behind the hay shed. Dean carried 2 at a time. Ruth took one, and he tried to pull it from her hand. "I can carry a gate. I know. I can carry it faster, then get another." They built a narrow lane from the barn door to the machine shed. Rain ran down Ruth's neck and filled her boots. Dean moved behind the flock while she stood at the opening with a bucket of grain, shaking it until the lead ewe stepped into the yard. The flock followed in a pale, jostling rush. One ewe broke toward the orchard. Dean cut her off, slipped in mud, and landed on one knee. The ewe trotted past him with the serene satisfaction of having proved a point. Ruth caught her near the garden fence. "Your footwork's gotten slow," she told him. "I'm 45. Then stop falling like you're 80. For an instant, he grinned. They settled the sheep in the machine shed, checked each one for cuts, and spread dry straw over the concrete. By the time they finished, another pair of headlights had turned into the lane. Mara and Luis climbed out wearing rain jackets. "We saw the roof from the road," Mara said. Dean's grin disappeared. Luis surveyed the yard. "Everybody all right?" "The sheep are moved," Ruth said. "The stand took 2 trees. We brought tarps." Dean looked at the rolled blue tarps in their truck. "I have tarps." "Good," Mara said. "Now there are more." Nobody argued with that. They worked under truck headlights. Luis and Dean secured the loose roofing with rope from opposite ends of the barn, speaking only when the task required it. Mara helped Ruth photograph every damaged section before they moved anything. "Wide shot first," Mara said. "Then close." Ruth held up the receipt book in its plastic kitchen bag. "I have the time written down." Dean glanced over from the ladder. "You're documenting a storm now?" "Yes." "Do you need a receipt from the wind?" "If it offers one." Mara coughed into her sleeve to hide a laugh. Ben arrived near midnight in his green truck. having driven past on his way home from his sister's house. He lowered the window. This a private disaster, or can anybody join? You charge an emergency call fee? Ruth asked. Only if you're bleeding. No one is, then I'll try harder. He helped Dean brace the barn door and inspected the remaining rafters with a flashlight. Two had split. Another had pulled loose from the plate. Don't put weight on that roof, he said. I know, Dean replied. Ben shone the light at him. Then we both contributed. By 1 a.m, the barn was covered well enough to keep out most of the rain. The farm stand had to wait. The fallen trunks were stable, the power was off, and darkness made every cut more dangerous. Mara and Luis left first. Ben followed after making Ruth promise not to climb a ladder. Dean stayed. He sat at the kitchen table in wet jeans while Ruth made coffee. Mud dried in flakes around his boots. The red jacket hung over the back of Walter's chair. Take that off there, Ruth said. Dean moved it without asking why. She placed coffee by his right hand. He looked at the cup, then at her. You remembered? I raised you. They drank in the humming quiet after the storm. Power had returned, but one kitchen light flickered. Rainwater tapped from Dean's jacket onto the floor. You should have called me sooner, he said. You arrived before I knew what needed calling. I heard it on the scanner. Wind went right across your place. My place. Dean closed his eyes briefly. Do we have to do that tonight? No? Good. He rubbed both hands around the mug. A cut crossed one knuckle. Ruth brought the first aid box and set it beside him. It's nothing. Then it won't take long. He let her clean it. The ordinary intimacy hurt more than the shouting had. His hands were Walter's hands, broad across the palm, nails cut too close. Ruth remembered splinters, fish hooks, and a broken thumb Dean hid for 2 days because he did not want to miss a livestock show. You did good moving the sheep, he said. I have moved sheep before. That isn't what I meant. Ruth taped gauze over his knuckle. I know. He left just before dawn, after checking the tarps once more. At 8, Ruth called the insurance company. The adjuster came the following afternoon, photographed the same damage Ruth had photographed, measured the barn, and asked when the roof had last been replaced. Sections over the years, Ruth said. What year was the main structure roofed? Walter would know. The answer escaped before she could stop it. The adjuster waited. 1998, she said, possibly 99. The farm stand carried only limited outbuilding coverage. Its roof had already been patched, and the porch was considered deteriorated before the storm. The barn qualified for repair, but depreciation and the deductible would leave Ruth paying a large portion herself. How large? She asked. I'll have to run the estimate. Give me a range. He did. Ruth wrote it down. Dean arrived while the adjuster was inspecting the apple trees. He had changed the bandage on his hand. I called Mercer Roofing, he said. They can start next week. Did they give you a written bid? They've done work for my company. That isn't what I asked. They're reliable. The adjuster moved discreetly toward his truck. Dean waited until the man was out of earshot. The barn needs covered before the next rain. It is covered, with tarps, for now. Let me handle this. Ruth closed the receipt book. What does handle mean? I deal with the insurance company, hire the crew, order materials. You don't need 5 bids in a folder for every nail. I need to know what it costs. Then I'll tell you. Before or after the numbers are firm. The words landed. Dean looked toward the damaged stand. I came in the middle of the night, he said. And I'm grateful. Are you? Yes. You trust me enough to climb a broken barn in a storm, but not enough to buy roofing. One risked you, the other risks me. His jaw moved. I confront the materials through the company, he said. Put me back on the farm account so I can pay expenses as they come in. We'll sort it out when insurance pays. There it was. Help braided tightly around the same old terms. No, Ruth said. You don't even know what you're saying no to. I know exactly. You'd rather pay more than let me help. I will pay you fairly for work we agree on. I will not give you access to my account. I'm your son. That is not a banking position. He laughed sharply. You've been waiting to say that. No, I wish I never needed to. Dean looked at the ruined porch, the torn roof, the branches scattered across the yard. You can't receipt book your way out of everything. No, but I can keep from owing a person who changes the price afterward. His face went pale beneath the sunburn. He got into his truck and left without offering another contractor's name. The insurance estimate arrived 2 days later. Ruth placed it beside 3 roofing bids, a lumber estimate, and the balance sheet from her ledger. Restoring the barn exactly as it had been would consume the insurance payment, most of the first rent installment, and more savings than she was willing to touch. Rebuilding the farm stand in its old shape made even less sense. The wide porch had been built for bins of sweet corn they no longer grew. Half the interior shelves had stood empty during its last years. Claire came Friday evening and spread the bids across the kitchen table. "You don't have to rebuild both right now," she said. "If I don't fix the stand before harvest, there is no point reopening. Then make it smaller. Your father built that stand, I know." The sentence held no challenge. Ruth looked at Walter's faded chalkboard leaning against the wall. The next morning, Ben brought a chainsaw, Mara and Luis brought a log splitter, and Claire brought work gloves that still had tags on them. Dean did not come. They cut the fallen apple trees away from the stand. The wood inside one trunk was dark with rot. "This tree looked healthy," Claire said. "From the house," Ruth replied. Ben examined the crushed porch. "Some of these boards are sound. Barn siding too, if it comes off clean. Can it be reused? Lumber forgets what shape it used to be." Ruth walked through the damaged stand, measuring what remained. She marked the refrigerator space, the sink, and the front counter. Then she crossed out the storage room and half the porch. The larger field tractor sat in the equipment shed behind them, unused since the Bells had brought their own machinery. Walter had bought it secondhand for corn and soybean work. Keeping it would mean insurance, maintenance, and a payment due in August. Ruth ran her hand along the dusty fender. On Monday, she called the dealer and asked what it would bring on consignment. The number was not generous. It was enough. Dean called 20 minutes after the dealer posted the listing. "You're selling Dad's tractor?" "I'm selling a tractor I no longer need. You're taking the farm apart. I'm trying to keep the parts that can live. You rented the ground, sold the equipment, and now you're tearing down his stand. The storm tore it down. You know what I mean." Ruth looked through the kitchen window. Ben had stacked salvage boards by length. Mara was marking damaged orchard limbs with orange tape. Claire was at the stand, trying to remove Walter's chalkboard without cracking the frame. "Yes," Ruth said. "I do." "Then why are you doing it?" "Because Walter had preserved machines past usefulness, promises past fairness, and plans that assumed Ruth would always agree. Because Dean mistook being remembered for being obeyed. Because 2 healthy-looking apple trees had been rotten inside. "I am not rebuilding the farm as a monument," Ruth said. "I am rebuilding what I can operate." Dean was silent. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its anger. "Where does that leave me?" Ruth watched Claire lift the chalkboard free. "I don't know yet," she said, "but it cannot leave me nowhere." Dean ended the call without saying goodbye. Ruth kept the phone against her ear until the empty line began to beep. Then she wrote the dealer's quoted consignment fee beside the tractor's estimated value. The tractor sold 11 days later to a farmer in northern Arkansas. After the remaining note, dealer fee, hauling, and a repair the buyer required, Ruth received $13,904.18. The check looked too small for the space the machine had occupied. She stood in the equipment shed after it was loaded. Dust marked the concrete beneath each tire, 4 clean rectangles surrounded by chaff and oil stains. Walter's coffee can still sat on a ledge above the empty bay, half full of hitch pins that fit nothing Ruth could identify. She left the can where it was. The sale paid the barn roof contractor's deposit, the replacement rafters, and the overdue veterinary account from Walter's last month. Ruth put the remaining money into the farm account and attached the deposit receipt to the dealer's settlement statement. No part of it felt like gain. Mercer Roofing began on a Tuesday. Ruth had chosen them after all, but through a written bid that separated labor, metal, lumber, and disposal. Dean's contact did not earn him account access. It earned him the small satisfaction of having recommended a competent company. The foreman, a heavyset man named Darrell, called her Mrs. Mercer until she corrected him 3 times. "Ruth," she said from below the ladder. "Yes, ma'am, that is not better." He grinned. "My mother would haunt me. She can wait her turn." The crew removed bent metal and lowered the damaged rafters. Ben claimed the usable lumber before it reached the debris pile. He and Luis sorted it on sawhorses while Mara pulled old nails. Ruth paid the Bells for the first 2 evenings. On the 3rd, Mara refused the check. "We need a different arrangement," she said. "I don't barter with people who won't name a price. That's why we're naming one. The orchard would require spraying, mowing, thinning, picking, and sorting before any fruit reached the stand. Ruth knew the work, but could not do all of it. Mara and Luis had labor and equipment, but little experience marketing apples. They proposed taking a percentage of the orchard sales after direct expenses. How large a percentage? Ruth asked. Mara named one. Ruth named a smaller one. Luis sat on the barn threshold eating crackers while the women argued. You have an opinion? Mara asked him. I have learned not to develop one until the numbers stop moving. They settled at 30% after spray, packaging, and hired picking costs. Ruth would keep the wool, preserves, and honey income. The Bells would share apple and cider sales. All expenses required receipts. Mara held out her hand. 1 season. 1 season, Ruth agreed. Then she made them put it in writing. Claire designed a simple spreadsheet matching Ruth's ledger categories. She called it Orchard instead of Mercer Farm because, she said, computers respected specific names. Computers do not respect anything, Ruth replied. That's healthy. Keep that attitude. The new barn roof went on in dark green metal instead of the old silver. Ruth chose the color because it cost the same and because Walter would have chosen silver without asking her. The smaller farm stand took shape from salvaged boards. Ben squared the frame. Luis rebuilt the counter. Claire painted the interior a warm cream after Ruth rejected 3 shades for looking like a dentist's waiting room. What color is a farm stand supposed to be? Claire asked. Not nervous? They found a pale yellow. Ruth approved. Work changed their conversations. Side by side with scrapers and brushes, Ruth and Claire could approach subjects neither would have survived across the kitchen table. Did you know Dean called me before he called you when Dad collapsed? Claire asked one afternoon. Ruth kept painting the window trim. No. He asked whether he should tell you how bad it looked. What did you say? I said you were his wife. The brush dragged a thick streak through the paint. Then he called me, Ruth said. Eventually, Ruth set the brush across the tray. Why didn't you tell me? You were at the hospital by then. I mean, afterward. Claire looked out through the glassless window frame. There was always an afterward when it would be easier. The phrase belonged to Walter's note, even if Claire did not know it. Ruth picked up the brush again. I should have called you more. You called. I should have asked better questions. Claire rubbed a smear of yellow paint from her wrist. We're asking them now. It was not forgiveness. It was better than pretending no forgiveness was needed. The first family call came from Walter's sister Janice. Janice lived in Tulsa, visited twice a year, and considered distance a form of neutrality. I heard there was a storm, she said. There was. And you sold the big tractor. Ruth shifted the phone to her other ear. The storm did not cause that. Dean says you're changing everything at once. Dean has discovered telephones. He's worried. He has an interesting way of showing it. Janice lowered her voice. He said you rented the crop ground to strangers. I rented it to farmers. You know what I mean. Ruth looked out at Mara, driving the orchard mower between the rows. No, she said. I don't. I only think big decisions should wait when a person is grieving. How long? Well, I don't know. A year? 2? Until you feel like yourself. I have never been a widow before. This may be myself now. Janice sighed. You don't have to be sharp, and you don't have to call from Oklahoma to check whether I'm competent. I did not say that. No, Dean did. The silence that followed confirmed he had told her. Ruth ended the call politely. Then she wrote Janice's name on a scrap of paper, considered filing it under expenses, and threw it away. Other calls followed. Walter's cousin asked whether Ruth had considered an auction. A neighbor invited her to supper and spent dessert explaining the advantages of selling before interest rates changed. Nobody mentioned that Dean had spoken to them. Nobody needed to. Ruth began answering questions with questions. Had they inspected the farm accounts? Were they volunteering to repair the barn? Did they want their own children deciding when their grief had lasted long enough? The calls slowed. In early August, Ruth was washing wool blankets on the line when 2 unfamiliar trucks turned into the lane behind Dean's. He got out with a man and woman Ruth recognized from a farm 30 miles north. The Larkins owned several hundred acres and had bought 2 nearby properties in recent years. Dean walked toward the house. Ruth left the wet blanket dripping in the basket. What is this? Just a conversation. You invited people onto my property. I told them you might be willing to hear a number. The Larkins remained near their truck, visibly regretting every decision that had brought them there. I am not. Dean kept his voice low. You haven't heard it. I don't care if they brought it engraved on stone. Mom, be reasonable. The word sharpened everything. Ruth looked at Mr. Larkin. Did my son tell you he owns this farm? No, ma'am. He removed his cap. He said the family was discussing options. The family is not. Mrs. Larkin touched her husband's arm. We should go. Dean turned. You drove all this way. Give us 10 minutes. No, Ruth said. The Larkins left with apologies. Dust from their trucks drifted across the yard. Dean watched until they reached the road. You humiliated me. You brought buyers without asking. It wasn't a sale. It was an offer. On something that does not belong to you. It was supposed to. The words came out stripped of diplomacy. Ruth held still. Dean pressed both hands to his hips. Dad built this for me. Your father built it for himself. He told me, I know what he told you. He also left every acre to me because it was ours. He trusted you to keep it in the family. Did he write that somewhere, or is it another arrangement no one can prove? Dean looked toward the orchard. Fresh paint showed through the farm stand's open doorway. The new barn roof flashed green in the sun. You're spending everything, he said. I am spending what the work costs. You sold a tractor to build a fruit stand that might make a few $1,000s. I sold a tractor that cost money to keep and no longer had a job. Because you rented the job to the Bells. For 1 year. You say that like they'll leave once they've got their hands on it. Mara and Luis have followed every term we agreed on, because they know you're deciding who gets the farm. There it was, not concern about fertilizer or planting or old machinery. Fear. Ruth's anger shifted beneath her. Are you in trouble? She asked. Dean's eyes moved away. How bad is the excavation business? This is not about my company. You used farm money to pay its bills. You brought buyers to my yard. It is exactly about your company. The county still owes me. How much? Enough. That means nothing. He kicked at a piece of gravel. If we sold part of the north ground, it would clear every debt. You could keep the house, the barn, the orchard. You'd never have to worry. And you? I could start clean. Ruth understood then that Dean had not imagined her death. He had imagined her consent. In his version, she would be grateful to trade land for safety, and he would call the rescue mutual. How much do you owe? She asked. I said I can handle it. With what? His face closed. Ruth stepped nearer. Your future cannot depend on my ending. I'm trying to save what's left. So am I. From me? From the way we have all been living. Dean's mouth twisted. You've got Claire in your ear, the Bells in Dad's fields, Ben playing carpenter, and now you think that's a family. Ruth heard the insult. She also heard the loneliness inside it. They showed up without asking for my bank password, she said. He flinched. She wished the sentence back, not because it was false, but because it was designed to hurt. Dean walked to his truck. Tell the Larkins not to contact me, Ruth said. He opened the door. They won't. And don't bring anyone else here. They've seen enough. He drove away. Ruth returned to the laundry line. The blanket in the basket had bled indigo dye into the wash water. She lifted it with both hands, but the weight pulled at her shoulder. Mara crossed the yard from the orchard and silently took the other end. Together they pinned the blanket to the line. You hear all of that? Ruth asked. Enough. I don't need an opinion. I wasn't offering one. Ruth smoothed the wet edge. He thinks you want the farm. Mara secured another clothespin. We want land. That isn't the same as wanting yours. The distinction mattered. By evening, the blanket hung straight in the warm wind. The new farm stand roof was finished. Claire had rehung Walter's chalkboard inside, where his faded price remained beneath a clean black surface waiting for something new. Ruth stood in the doorway and opened the receipt book. She entered lumber, paint, roofing screws, sink fittings, and labor. Every expense reduced the balance. Every line also showed what now stood in its place. She closed the book only when the light became too poor to write. The first apples ripened before the sign was ready. Ruth found 6 Honey Crisps blushing on the east side of a tree and carried them to the kitchen in the front of her shirt. She cut one at the table. The flesh snapped beneath the knife. Juice shone along the blade. She took a bite and waited. Too tart. A week early. Walter would have picked half the row immediately and insisted customers liked flavor. Ruth set the remaining apples on the windowsill and wrote "Wait beneath harvest" on the orchard sheet. A week later, the sugar had come in. Mara and Luis brought harvest bins, picking bags, and 3 adults they regularly hired during busy seasons. Ruth paid the workers through the orchard account and insisted each person sign for hours. Luis climbed the ladders. Mara sorted fruit beneath the new barn roof. Ruth moved between rows, correcting twists that would tear next year's buds and showing everyone how to cradle a bruised apple instead of tossing it into the coal bin. By noon, her legs trembled. Mara pointed toward a folding chair. "Sit. I can sort standing. You can also fall standing." "I have not fallen." Luis passed carrying a full picking bag. "Neither had I until the sheep incident. That you cheated." Ruth sat, but she kept the grading table close enough to reach. The orchard produced less than half of what it had in its best years. 2 varieties were too damaged to sell fresh. The storm had scarred fruit on 3 rows. Some trees offered only a few dozen apples. Still, crates began filling the rebuilt stand. The Bells added tomatoes, peppers, onions, late sweet corn from another field they rented, and jars of honey from Luis's brother. Ruth brought wool skeins, felted dryer balls, blackberry preserves, and apple butter. She cooked in batches small enough that her wrists could manage the stirring. Claire arrived on opening morning with a new chalk marker. "We have chalk," Ruth said. "This one doesn't smear." "Then, how do you know it's chalk?" Claire ignored her and wrote prices on Walter's old board. Beneath the faint ghost of Honeycrisp, $2 per pound, she wrote the new price. Ruth stared at it. "That is robbery. That is what the apples cost. They grew on trees. Trees you pruned, sprayed, mowed, picked, sorted, and nearly sacrificed a shoulder to. No one wants to hear that when they're buying fruit. They don't have to hear it. They have to pay the price." Mara leaned through the service window. "Claire's right. This family is getting crowded," Ruth muttered. The first customer was Denise Carson, who bought 2 bags of apples and examined the new sink with the seriousness of a building inspector. "Earl said you gave him fits over that fertilizer deposit." "Earl survived. He enjoys having something to complain about." Then I provided a service. By midday, cars had begun stopping steadily. Older neighbors came partly to see what Ruth had done. A restaurant owner from town tasted 3 apple varieties and ordered 2 crates a week. A woman who spun yarn bought every gray fleece Ruth had washed. Ruth rang each sale into a small tablet Claire had programmed, then wrote the daily total in her ledger because she did not entirely trust invisible numbers. At 4, rain began, and business stopped. They sat beneath the shortened porch eating bruised apples and counting the cash drawer. The day's gross sounded impressive until Claire deducted sales tax, packaging, card fees, and the Bell's share. Luis looked at the remainder. "We have not become wealthy." "I had plans," Ben said. He had spent the afternoon leaning on the counter and telling customers he built anything that looked straight. Ruth counted again. The amount was modest. It covered the week's picking labor and supplies, with enough left for the first installment on a replacement refrigerator. Mara raised a paper cup of cider, to not losing money. "That is a beautiful toast," Ruth said. It was. They opened Friday through Sunday. Ruth learned that people bought more preserves when offered samples and that leaving 3 apples in a basket made customers think inventory was poor, while leaving 7 made the fruit look special. Claire created inventory sheets. Luis began experimenting with cider blends. Mara talked the restaurant owner into taking cosmetically damaged fruit at a lower price. The work was ordinary, tiring, and profitable by inches. Dean did not come. Once, Ruth saw his truck slow near the stand. The driver turned his face away before she could be certain it was him. The Bells harvested the winter wheat and delivered the scale tickets in a clear plastic sleeve. The yield was mediocre, the price lower than Walter's contract the previous year, and the custom harvesting bill exactly what they had agreed. Ruth paid it. When the fall rent installment arrived, Mara included a line-by-line accounting of the ditch credit. Luis had undercounted his labor by 2 hours. Ruth added the hours back. "You inspected the invoice?" Mara asked when she saw the corrected amount. "I inspect everything." Luis looked pleased. "This system works when it benefits me." Corn harvest began under a hard blue sky. Ruth watched the Bells' combine move through the fields without inventing excuses to interfere. The rows belonged to their season. The land remained hers. That distinction had grown easier to carry. Dean came on a Tuesday evening after the farm stand closed. His truck was gone. He arrived in a white company pickup Ruth had seen one of his crew driving. The Mercer Excavation logo had been scraped from the door, leaving a darker rectangle in the paint. He looked thinner. The red jacket hung loose at his waist. Ruth was stacking empty apple crates. Coffee? No. She waited. He walked through the stand, touching the new counter, the salvage shelves, and the edge of Walter's chalkboard. You made it small. It fits the business. How much did all this cost? Why? Curious? You have never been curious without a purpose. He stepped onto the porch. The county payment came through. Relief loosened something in Ruth. Good. It wasn't enough. How much are you short? He looked toward the orchard. Dean. The second excavator went back to the lender. Ruth set down the crate in her hands. Repossessed? Surrendered? There's a difference. Does the difference help? No. The company owed on the remaining excavator, 2 trucks, payroll taxes, the concrete supplier, and the house settlement with Amy. Dean explained each obligation as if he were describing weather that had happened to him. The county delay had hurt. Fuel prices had hurt. A drainage job that required rework had hurt. Walter's illness had pulled him away during the season when he should have been bidding. All of it was true. How much of the grain money is left in Mercer operations? Ruth asked. His face closed. None. How much can you repay? Not now? When? I don't know. The old answer sat between them. Dean stepped off the porch and picked up a fallen apple. He rolled it in his palm. Sell me the North 40, he said. With what money? I have a buyer for the excavator. I can put together a down payment. You want to sell the tool that earns your income to buy land from me. I can lease equipment. At what cost? I've run the numbers. Show me. He threw the apple into the coal bin. You don't have to audit every breath I take. If you want me to sell land, I do. You could finance it. I pay you over time. And if your business fails, the land comes back. After what has happened to it, his eyes flashed. You gave the Bells a lease for 1 season, paid in advance with written terms. Right. The perfect Bells. They are not perfect. They are clear. Dean paced to the end of the porch and back. You're making money from this place because I kept it running all those years. You helped keep it running. I gave it my life. You built a company while using farm equipment, farm fuel, and farm labor. And Dad agreed. I know. Then stop acting like I robbed you in an alley. Ruth lowered her voice. You took income after he died and told people I was confused when I asked where it went. I was panicking. That does not make it mine again. Dean's hands curled at his sides. You want receipts? Fine. I'll give you receipts. Every hour I worked without pay. Every weekend, every emergency. Every job I turned down because Dad called. Bring them. You owe me more than $31,000. Then show me. I don't need paperwork to know what I did. You needed paperwork before you took payment for it. He laughed in disbelief. You really think this little store proves you can run the farm? No. I think paying what I owe and knowing what I don't proves I can run my life. A car turned into the lane. It was Claire. Dean saw her and shook his head. Of course she's here. She comes on Tuesdays to help with inventory. You two finally got what you wanted. Claire stepped out of the car. What did we want? A farm without me. Ruth answered before Claire could. Nobody wanted that. Dean looked at her. For one moment, he seemed close to believing her. Then he said, You made sure of it. He left in the white truck. Claire watched the taillights. What happened to his truck? He's losing the business. Claire closed her eyes. You knew? Amy called yesterday. She wasn't sure he had told you. He wants the North 40. He wants what selling it would fix. He says the farm owes him for years of labor. Claire looked toward the dark fields. It probably owes him something. Ruth had expected agreement, but not so quickly. You think he should take the land? No. I think Dad used someday as wages, and you and I let him. Ruth carried the empty crates into the stand. Claire followed. On the counter lay a carbon copy from Dean's equipment notebook, left weeks earlier in the banker's box. Ruth unfolded it. Hours filled both sides. Some entries named fields, repairs, and dates. Others simply said, Dad. We need more than 6 months, Ruth said. Claire set down her purse. How far back? 7 years. That's when he bought the skid steer. They worked at the kitchen table until midnight. Bank statements, tax files, invoices, Dean's notebooks, and Walter's disordered folders spread around them. Claire created categories. Ruth supplied memory. Which fence had been rebuilt? Whose truck hauled gravel? Whether the farm or company used a part. They found payments to Dean everyone had forgotten. They found work he had never billed. They found fuel his trucks had used and repairs Walter had paid. The totals moved in both directions. At 1 a.m, Ruth called Dean. He answered on the fourth ring. What? Come Thursday evening. Why? To settle what the farm owes you. He was silent. Bring every record you have, she said. I will do the same. You think a calculator settles family? No, Ruth said, but it may stop us using family to hide the bill. Thursday's rain began before noon and settled into a quiet tapping against the kitchen windows. Ruth carried the final stack of papers from Walter's office and arranged them around the table. Bank statements went at the far end. Dean's labor notebook sat beside the calculator. Receipts filled 3 folders: farm paid, Dean paid, and disputed. Claire stood at the counter wrapping leftover apple cake. You don't have to leave, Ruth said. Yes, I do. He'll think I sent you away for him. He'll think I stayed to gang up on him if I'm here. That has never stopped you before. Claire pressed the foil flat. This is between you and Dean. You helped with the numbers. I scanned and categorized. You made every decision. Ruth checked the total at the bottom of the ledger again. Claire put the cake in the refrigerator. You're sure? No. Good. What does that mean? It means you understand this isn't perfect. Ruth shut the receipt book. I know what every figure comes from. That isn't the same thing. No. Claire put on her coat. At the door, she hugged Ruth quickly, as though hoping to complete the act before either of them became awkward. You do not have to punish him to protect yourself, she said. I know, and you don't have to rescue him to prove you love him. Ruth's arms tightened around her daughter. I know, she said again. This time, she nearly did. Dean arrived at 6:20. He carried an accordion folder beneath one arm and Walter's old lunch cooler in the other. What's that? Ruth asked. Receipts. In a cooler? I found them in the shop office. He set it on the floor. Paper filled the interior where ice packs and sandwiches should have been. Some receipts had curled into tubes. Others were speckled with oil. Dean looked around. Claire not coming? No. Why? Would you like me to call her? No. Ruth had made beef stew. Dean said he was not hungry, then ate 2 bowls while she explained how she had valued equipment, hours, and unpaid labor. You used Carson's custom rates? He asked. Carson's, 2 neighboring farms, and your own invoices when you billed other customers. My customer rate includes profit. So, does the value I assigned your work? He stopped with his spoon halfway to his mouth. You included profit? A fair rate is not just your cost. Dean lowered the spoon. Claire tell you that? No. He looked faintly suspicious, as though fairness might be a trick. After supper, Ruth cleared the bowls and brought the folders to the center of the table. We are not deciding what the farm is worth, she said. We are not deciding what your father intended. We are accounting for 7 years of work, equipment, fuel, payments, and withdrawals. You can't leave out what Dad intended. I can leave it out of arithmetic. Dean opened his accordion folder. Fine. They began with his skid steer. Dean's notebook showed 684 hours marked for farm use over 7 years. Ruth had reduced that to 511 after removing hours when the machine worked on Dean's equipment yard, county jobs adjacent to Mercer land, or projects the farm had already paid by check. You counted the creek crossing twice, she said. No, I didn't. You billed 32 hours in June and listed the same job again in July. The June entry was hauling rock. July was placing it. Ruth found the gravel invoice. The delivery dates supported him. All right, she said. Dean blinked. All right, I'll add the hours. He sat back. Just like that. You showed me. The first concession changed the room. Not enough to make them allies, but enough to make each correction feel less like surrender. They moved through fence work, snow clearing, field repairs, hauling, and the west drainage crossing. Dean claimed full commercial rates for his dump trailer. Ruth showed him checks Walter had written with trailer on the memo lines. That was for hauling cattle panels, Dean said. Where? To the auction. Which year? Dean thought. That might have been the same month. Then it was already paid. He crossed out the entry himself. The farm fuel required an hour and 2 cups of coffee. Dean had receipts for gallons, but not destinations. Ruth had bulk tank records and mileage from his company files. They reconstructed what they could and split what they could not. "This is ridiculous," Dean said at one point. "Yes, Dad would have guessed. That is why we are here." Dean rubbed his forehead, but kept calculating. At 9, they reached the months surrounding Walter's illness. Dean's notebook changed during that period. Entries became shorter and less precise. "Hospital, north fence." Dad called. "Pump." "Missed coal bid." Ruth touched the page. "You cannot bill the farm for missing a bid while your father was in the hospital." "I didn't bill it. I wrote down what happened. You included 12 hours. I spent 12 hours there. At the hospital, 4 there. The rest doing his work." "What work?" Dean looked toward Walter's empty chair. Everything he thought couldn't wait. The well pump had failed during Walter's second admission. Dean replaced it. A windstorm dropped the north fence, and Dean repaired it before the sheep found the gap. He hauled feed, checked fields, serviced the combine, and still drove to the hospital each evening. Ruth remembered him arriving late with dust on his boots. She had resented the dust on the floor. "Those are farm hours," she said. "Some, which aren't." Dean tapped hospital. Ruth waited. He drew a line through those hours. "Those were mine." She added the pump, fence, feeding, and machinery work at the agreed rate. The total rose by nearly $4,000. Dean stared at it. "Why are you doing that?" he asked. "Because the farm owes it. You could say I did it for Dad. You did." The work still had value. His face twisted, and he looked down before Ruth could tell whether anger or grief had reached him. They resumed. Walter had paid some of Dean's company insurance for 2 years, calling it equipment coverage. The fleet tracking subscription, personal truck repairs, and several tire purchases had also come from farm funds. Dean argued that the trucks served both operations. Ruth credited the farm's proportion and assigned the rest to him. The check to Amy remained entirely his. "She didn't know," Ruth said. "I know. You told her where it came from?" "After she called me. She deserved to know before." Dean folded the check image along its printed edge. "I was going to replace it when the county paid. You keep spending the same payment before it arrives. You think I don't know that now?" His voice cracked across the kitchen. Ruth stopped. Dean stood and walked to the sink. Rain streaked the dark glass above it. "I had 11 men depending on me," he said. "A concrete supplier who'd already extended terms twice. Amy saying she'd take me to court. Dad's equipment sitting here needing repairs. You asking why the grain check was late. I asked where it went. I know what you asked. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I needed 1 more month. You used my money to buy it. I was going to put it back. And when you could not, I became confused." Dean turned from the window. "We're doing the numbers, remember?" Ruth wanted to force the other answer from him. Instead, she sat back down. "All right," she said. "The numbers." At 10:30, every line they could support had been entered. Dean's documented labor and equipment exceeded what Ruth had first estimated. The farm had benefited from his work, especially during Walter's illness, and the 3 years when Dean's machinery performed jobs Walter could no longer do. The farm had also paid more of Dean's company expenses than either man had admitted. Walter authorized much of it. Dean took more after Walter died. When the legitimate farm share was credited, the personal expenses removed, and the grain transfer applied, Dean had received $9,430.62 more than the farm owed him. He read the final page without speaking. "This is wrong," he said. "Show me where. It has to be. Then show me." He went back through the totals. Ruth waited while he checked the calculator, examined the rates, and compared 3 figures to his notebook. He found a transposed number. Correcting it reduced the balance by $270. He found nothing else. $9,160.62, Ruth said. Dean pushed the page away. "So that's it. 7 years, and I owe you? 7 years, and you were worth more than anyone paid you. Both things can be true. If Dad had paid me properly, you should have demanded it. I was his son. And he used that." Dean looked up sharply. Ruth held his gaze. "So did I." The admission left a raw quiet behind it. "We promised you the farm someday," she said. "Then every time you gave more than you could afford, we treated that promise as payment. I defended it because your help made our lives possible. You said it would be mine. I know. You didn't say maybe. I know. Dean's chair scraped backward. I built my whole life around that. You built a business, beside this farm, with equipment that could serve both, with crews I could pull over here. I turned down work farther away because Dad said there was no point building something I couldn't run from here. Ruth had not known that. Why didn't you tell me? You always said how lucky we were to have me close. The words held no mockery. That made them harder. I was grateful, she said. You were comfortable. Ruth looked at the folders surrounding them, each debt finally named. Yes, she said. I was. Dean pressed his palms against the table. Then give me the North 40. Credit what I put in before these 7 years. Credit what you promised. I am not selling or giving you land. His face went blank. I will not sell it to save Mercer Excavation, she continued. I will not put the farm behind another promise. The $9,000 can be repaid over time, without interest while you rebuild your business. We can agree on an amount you can actually manage. You're offering me a payment plan. I am offering terms. I'm your son. Yes. Does that mean anything anymore? It means I am trying to keep you in my life without giving you control of it. He stared at her as if she had spoken in another language. Ruth reached for Walter's note and laid it between them. Help him through winter. Grain will cover note. Don't tell R until numbers are firm. Your father loved us, she said. He also taught both of us that love meant deciding for someone and explaining later. Dean did not touch the note. Ruth's voice lowered. At the cooperative, you didn't say I was wrong. You said I was confused. He looked toward the door. Why that word? She asked. His hand closed around his keys. Why did you need them to doubt my mind instead of your account? Dean remained standing, caught between the table and the rain. Then, very slowly, he sat back down. Dean rested his forearms on the table and looked at Walter's note. I knew it would work, he said. Ruth waited, at the co-op, saying you were confused. His thumb rubbed the worn edge of his key ring. People saw you at the hospital, at the funeral. Everybody knew you weren't sleeping, so you used it. I panicked. That does not answer me. He looked at her then. His face was exhausted, stripped of the expressions he used when bargaining or defending himself. If you knew where the money went, he said, then I had taken it. If you were mixed up, I was still helping. The rain tapped against the windows. You needed me to be confused, Ruth said. Yes. The word was barely audible. Dean stared at the figures on the final page. I kept telling myself the company would replace it. The county would pay. The next job would land. I'd move everything back before you understood the accounts. Then you walked into the co-op and Hollis was looking at me, so you made him look at me. Yes. Ruth's eyes burned. She refused to blink the tears loose. You took the thing I was most afraid of, she said, and put it in someone else's mouth. Dean frowned. After Walter died, I would walk into a room and forget why. I put the kettle in the refrigerator once. I could not remember the undertaker's name 5 minutes after shaking his hand. Every mistake made me wonder if something inside me had gone with your father. I didn't know. You did not ask. He lowered his head. Ruth could have comforted him. The impulse came automatically, old as motherhood, and nearly as dangerous as Walter's note. She held still until it passed. I was afraid too, Dean said. I know. No, you don't. His voice roughened. Dad was gone. The company was drowning. Amy had left. I kept thinking if I could hold everything in place for 1 more month, it would become the life I was supposed to have. And I was one more thing to hold in place. He did not deny it. Ruth turned the receipt book toward him. I will not tell people what you did. I will not embarrass you at church or call the Larkins or make Janice choose a side. Dean gave a bitter smile. She already chose yours after you yelled at her. I did not yell. You don't have to. But I will correct anyone who says I cannot manage my affairs. I will not protect you by agreeing that I am less capable than I am. I understand. And you will never speak for me again, unless I ask. He nodded once. Say it. I won't speak for you. Unless you ask. Ruth closed the folder marked disputed. Dean looked at the repayment figure. I can't do $9,000 right now. I did not ask for it right now. I don't know what work I'll have next month. Then we start with $100. When your income changes, we review it, without interest, for 6 months. After that, we discuss it. You have this planned. I have spent months learning to plan. He almost smiled. It vanished before fully arriving. "And the farm?" he asked. "What about it? You said I could come back as your son." Ruth remembered saying it only in her own mind, on nights when anger rehearsed conversations better than life ever delivered them. "You can," she said. "What does that mean?" "It means you knock before entering." He looked toward the back door. "You come for coffee without inspecting the equipment," she continued. "You ask how I am and wait for the answer. If you work here, we agree on the work before you start. So, I make an appointment to be family. No. You stop using work as the price of admission." Dean leaned back. "I don't know how to do that," he said. The honesty surprised them both. "Neither do I," Ruth replied. "We can learn, or we can keep sending each other bills no one can pay." She wrote the repayment terms on a clean page. They both signed. Dean took copies of the calculations, Walter's note, and the agreement. Ruth kept the originals. At the door he paused. "Did you mean it?" he asked. "About me being worth more than I was paid?" "Yes." He looked down at the folder under his arm. "Dad ever say that?" "Not often enough." Dean opened the door. Ruth added, "Neither did I." He stood beneath the porch light, with rain blowing against his jacket. "No," he said, "you didn't." Then he walked to the white truck. Ruth did not call him back to make the leaving easier. Mercer Excavation closed before Christmas. Dean sold the remaining excavator and one truck. The proceeds paid the concrete supplier and most of the payroll taxes. Amy received part of what he still owed her on the house. The rest became another written payment agreement. He took a job estimating drainage projects for a contractor in Jefferson City. It paid less than owning a successful company and more than owning a failing one. The work kept him away from the farm during the week. His first $100 payment arrived by mail. Inside the envelope was a company check from his new employer and a note in the memo line, one of many. Ruth deposited it and issued a receipt. He did not visit that month. Claire came twice. The first time, she brought soup and reorganized Ruth's freezer without permission. Ruth made her put everything back, then helped label the shelves. The second time, Ruth handed her a key to the farmhouse. Claire held it in her palm. "What is this for?" "The door. I recognize the technology, for emergencies. Or if I ask you to come." Claire closed her fingers around it. "Not because you expect me to manage things." "No." "Not because Dean's out." "No." "Then why?" Ruth shrugged. "Because I want you to have a key." Claire put it on her ring. The farm stand closed after the last apples sold. The orchard account finished the season with a modest profit. Ruth paid the Bells their share, kept enough for spring spray and replacement trees, and bought the refrigerator outright. The sheep entered winter with sound feet and clean records. The green barn roof held through 2 snows. Water still came through the farmhouse roof when rain blew from the west. But Ruth had moved the repair into next year's budget instead of pretending the leak would respect grief. Mara and Luis returned to the kitchen table before planting season. This time, they brought a 5-year proposal. Ruth read it, crossed out 3 clauses, and added 2 of her own. The Bells would continue leasing the main crop ground. After the 5th season, they could purchase 24 acres along the eastern boundary at a price determined then, with a portion of each year's rent credited only if they met the soil and drainage terms. Luis studied the marked pages. "You're offering us a path to own it. I'm offering you a path to buy part of it." Mara looked at Ruth carefully. "And you're sure?" "No. That is why there are terms." They took the proposal home, revised it, and returned with questions. Nothing passed by handshake. Nothing depended on eventually. When all 3 signed, Ruth filed the agreement beside the 1-year lease rather than on top of it. The first season still mattered. It had earned the second. Dean began visiting in February. The first time, he knocked. Ruth opened the door and found him holding a sack of oranges. "Are those an apology?" she asked. "They were on sale." "Then come in." He drank coffee at the kitchen table without asking about the account balance. The effort was visible. He commented on the weather, the highway construction, and Janice's belief that her doctor was conspiring against Salt. Before leaving, he glanced toward the machine shed. "How's the tractor?" "Which tractor?" "The north one. Not leaking." He nodded. "Good." He did not inspect it. The visits remained awkward. Sometimes Dean stayed 15 minutes, sometimes an hour. Once they argued about Walter's torque wrench until Ruth reminded him she had already given it to him. They both laughed, though neither entirely trusted the laughter. He made his payments. When work was slow, Ruth accepted the agreed $100. When Dean received a bonus, he sent $500 without being asked. She recorded each payment and never used the balance to win an unrelated argument. Spring returned with mud, lambing, and new trees for the orchard. Ruth hired help to plant them. She directed from the ground and paid the invoice before the workers left. The Bells' second crop came in well. Their corn yield on the creek ground exceeded Luis's estimate after the ditch repair. The farm stand reopened with more produce, stronger apple orders, and a cider press Mara found used at an auction. At the end of harvest, Ruth invited everyone to supper in the repaired barn. Ben brought baked beans in a slow cooker, held shut with an extension cord. Claire brought 2 pies and accused him of transporting food like machinery. Mara and Luis set up folding tables beneath the green rafters. Denise and Earl Carson came with potato salad, and Hollis Wade brought cider from the cooperative's holiday basket. Dean had not answered Ruth's invitation. She told herself she had expected that. They ate beneath strings of work lights. The barn smelled of hay, apples, wool, and roasted meat. Conversation rose easily around the tables. Nobody asked Ruth whether she was managing. They asked when the stand would close, how many replacement trees had survived, and whether the apple butter recipe contained cloves. "It does not," Ruth said. Claire leaned toward Mara. "She considers cloves a character flaw. They are too pleased with themselves." The barn door squealed open. Dean stood outside, holding a foil-covered dish. "Am I late?" "Yes," Ruth said. He looked uncertain. "Put that on the table before it gets cold." The dish contained Walter's favorite corn casserole, made from the recipe Ruth had given Amy years earlier. Dean had baked it himself. The edges were burned, and the center leaned toward soup. Ben ate 2 servings. After supper, Dean noticed the lower barn door dragging against the threshold. "This hinge is pulling loose," he said. Ruth joined him. Both hinges had rusted, and one screw had backed halfway out. "I know," she said. "It's on the list. I can replace them tomorrow." "Estimate?" He looked at her, then took out his phone and checked the hardware store's website. $18 for galvanized hinges. Maybe $6 for screws. Labor? He considered. 1 cup of coffee. That depends on the quality. Fair. The next morning, Dean knocked at 8. He had the hinges, screws, and a receipt. Ruth made coffee while he removed the old hardware. She held the door steady, but did not take over. When the second hinge was tightened, the door swung cleanly and latched without lifting. Dean handed her the receipt. $23.86, he said. "I was close." Ruth paid him from the farm cash box. He accepted without protest and wrote "paid" on the receipt. After he left, she returned to the kitchen table. Outside, Mara and Luis were measuring rows for the new orchard trees. Claire's cup from the night before still sat beside the sink. Walter's glasses remained near the salt shaker, not because Ruth expected him to return, but because she had stopped needing every absence put away. She entered the hinge purchase in the ledger. Then she filed the receipt in its proper place, closed the box, and turned the key.